1 2. Check 1 2. Yep. Check 1 2. Check 1 2. Check 1 2. Check 1 2 3 4.
Test 1, 2, 3.
Good morning, everybody. Why don't we come on in and grab our seats, and we're about ready to start the show. Welcome to ChaserCon 2017. Yeah. Can you believe it? This is the 19th year for ChaserCon. Just amazing how ChaserCon has grown from what was an original get-together with the late Tim Samaras and myself and a few other folks. My son Adam, wherever he's at, he was at that very first one. And to what has gone into today. And next year, the 20th anniversary, stay tuned for some really cool things because we're going to try to make that one really, really special. And just so you know, right now, the 20th, we have to do it in Denver. I'm sorry. This is where it started out, and 20 years later, we're going to keep it in Denver. The year after, maybe we'll just go somewhere else again. I know we talked to folks about maybe doing Kansas City or someplace like that, and yeah, we may do there too. Since we did Norman last year, but we promised we were going to bounce it around to some places, and we will definitely do that. And before we get started, just a few little housekeeping things and some announcements I need to make. I hate to even bring this one up, but I've heard some comments already. We're here for ChaserCon. We're not here for any political debates, so let's keep that out the door, please. All right. And for those are not familiar with the layout here, out this door to the left at the end of the hall, there is a ladies' and a men's restroom. Across the way here is the lounge, and also they're going to have that place set up for lunchtime in there with a grab-and-go type of a menu. Some of you have already eaten some of the things from the restaurant that are grab-and-go. They have everything from wraps to sandwiches and chips and things like that. So when we break for lunch, hey, if you want to grab something real nice and quick that's really good and a reasonable price, right across in that lounge would be a good place to go. I'd like to thank some folks who have helped ChaserCon over the years, and my first thanks goes to these gentlemen here from SevereStudios, James and Corey and the gang, for all their help in streaming this thing live over the years and for running the sound and the video. And I also got to thank a big thanks to my wife Karen back there, because she does all the hard work behind the scenes. I get the easy part. I get to just come up here and talk to you all. She does all the stuff there. And Liz Deal just walking in the door back there, who has also assisted with the check-in over the years. Thanks, Liz. We appreciate all the work everybody does. And the biggest thanks to you all for coming here and to be a part of this. The ChaserCon was designed to be nothing but about you guys and to get everybody together and to have a good time, share some more stories, learn some more things about forecasting. Yes, to go into the bar and have a drink or two. And all right, how many people have had gummy bears last night? If you know what I'm talking about. Yes, of course, Colorado is legal to buy marijuana now, has been for a couple of years. And if you and if you happen to try some, just out of curiosity, the pot nowadays is a little different than it was in the stuff where you picked in a field when you were a kid and dried and smoked it. It's just a hair stronger. So be careful, all right? And don't take it back to your states with you that where it's illegal, because sometimes you get caught. We don't want to see anybody get caught. Right off the bat, we have the pleasure of having Dr. Karen Kosiba and Dr. Josh Wurman that are going to talk to us here in a little bit, and they actually brought down one of the Dows. So if you've never seen a Doppler on wheels truck, it's parked out on the northwest side of the building here, and during breaks and such, lunch, you're welcome to go on out and check it out. I'm sure they have some folks out there who will give you a tour of it and all. I'd also especially like to thank all of our sponsors and all of our vendors who have come here. First of all, we'd like to really give a special thanks to Weather Nation and Live Storms Media for being our main sponsors of ChaserCon 2017. Make sure you go around and visit all of the vendors back here. They got all kinds of really neat goodies for you to check out. Allison House, they've been with us for many, many years. You can see them set up right back here, Justin and the gang. Also, Weather Graphics, Tim Vasquez back in the corner. He's got some fantastic books back there and such for you. I've actually used Tim's books many, many times over the last 20 years in chasing. There we have another gentleman who is not here, but he's actually provided a great door prize for us, and that's Maximum Signal. If you've never tried Maximum Signal's amplifiers and antenna systems, they're amazing. And the new one that he just released is by far the best thing that I've ever tried. You want to go into places where you're getting really poor reception and boost your signal from a 1-bar to a 5-bar signal and be able to get data and stream and so forth. Check them out. They have there's actually a flyer in all your pamphlets there, and he's even offering, I think, like a $50 off the package to buy something from him. We'd like to also thank the Weather Pro Shop over here in Extreme Weather Videos, who they're not here, but they actually have a banner on our website, and Mezzomount, who are over here together. Make sure you check them out. They got some fantastic products over there. Anything Weather, Greg Potter over here on the right side. Make sure you check out his booths as well. And, of course, SevereStudios and Corey and the gang sitting over here on the front edge. Excuse me, I'm just getting over a cold. And we have Chaser's Edge back here in the far corner with Brandon and the gang. Make sure you check out theirs. Brecky is also set over here. Raise your hand, Brecky. Yeah. All right. And then we also have the Storm Assist guys up here in the front who, if you've never dealt with their products, go over there and check them out because they are a charity type of an organization. But, again, thank you to all their sponsors who have helped make ChaserCon possible. All right, we have a lot of door prizes that we're going to give away this morning, this morning and afternoon, and so please make sure you hang on to those kind of bluish colored tickets. Those will be good for all the door prizes with the exception of we actually have, I missed that one as well, we have a mobile threat net system that Barron is going to give away, and we also have the Accurite folks back here who are going to do their own drawing, and they have a lot of weather instruments and handheld anemometers and lightning detectors as well, and they've given us some products to give away, but they're actually doing their own drawing back there, so make sure you stop by their booth back there and sign up for their drawings. Okay? All right. I think that's about enough. I think it's about time to get started, don't you think? We got a great program. I hope you like all the speakers that we have this year and some of the fantastic topics that are going to be discussed. I'd like to introduce my first speaker, James LaDue, and he is here to talk to us about estimating tornado strength and some of the changes that are on the way. And Jim, you're telling me this is going to be a rip-roaring event here for your talk, right?
Oh, at least an EF3. So. At least an EF3. Yep. Thank you very much. Wow. Yeah, I'm pretty amazed. This is about as many people I've seen, except probably under Katie's storm last year in Oklahoma. I don't know how many of you have been there. Not many. Okay, that's good because I'm going to show some video from that. And that was a spectacular tornado. I'm going to talk about this project that I'm on, that I've been starting. And I'm going to do it kind of sort of like a life history of where my passions were over the past 20 years or more. And since this is the first time that I've talked at one of these ChaserCons, I thought it would be a good idea to introduce who I am. I work for the National Weather Service at a place called the Warning Decision Training Division. And my job is to actually train Weather Service forecasters in tornado, severe thunderstorm, even winter weather warning decision making. And so everything I do, including when I'm out in the field or when I'm at work or I visit offices or visit with you guys, is all about protecting life and property. And so my job is actually to look at it from making sure the Weather Service is as good as possible at issuing tornado, severe thunderstorm warnings, and so forth. But it's not only that, but also in, let's say, the service of risk assessment. You know, how safe are we from tornadoes? And the whole idea is well, how tornado. How many of you remember or know about the Red Rock tornado in '91? Yep, that was the one where we had a simple radar mounted on a tripod, and we would actually point it, turn it to the left, turn it to the right, and then I would wear headphones, and you can hear the whoosh go from right to left. And the higher the pitch, the stronger the winds. Well, on the Red Rock day, it went off the scale, okay? And we measured a wind speed of 287 miles per hour out of a couple of those. So it was an amazing event. We wrote up a paper about that and put it into a journal, and one of the reviewers said, from your description, it sounded like you were actually in the tornado. And technically speaking, yeah, we were inside the EF0 winds. And if I let go of that tripod, the whole radar would go flying over. So it's a good thing radars are a little bit bigger these days. But after that, we did a survey of our local area where we were scanning. And then the Weather Service did, and there was an EF4 rating. And it's like we had EF5, obviously, or back then F5. So interesting discrepancy. It started getting me to wonder what's going on here. And it progressed ever since then. 1999 was another big event. We actually surveyed a whole bunch of tornadoes, especially the Bridge Creek. And the Bridge Creek one was obviously the most intense damage I've ever seen. So it wasn't until I was working at Warning Decision Training Division at the time that I had the mission to train the entire Weather Service on the EF scale when it got introduced. And thank you. I tell you, I have to thank Drs. Kishore Mehta and Jim McDonald for creating this, because when we were doing surveys back before then, we would probably have only about 6 or 7 damage indicators, right? Damage indicators like houses or cars or, maybe concrete buildings or, things like that. So it was hard to go and figure out, okay, we got all these exotic damage indicators, and it obviously looked like they were severely damaged, and we couldn't tell what they were. There was no guidance. And these two people, along with a team that they built, created a huge amount of guidance and created the EF scale. And the one thing that they found was that our housing stock in this country was not nearly as strong as we thought it was. It didn't take 250 mile per hour winds to blow away a house. They found it only needed 200 miles an hour. And so they actually lowered the wind speeds down there. And of course, in the meteorology community, I think a lot of people were upset about that. It's like, how dare you knock down the wind speeds of our tornadoes? They're stronger than that, Well, they said nothing about what the peak wind speeds of the tornadoes were. It's just they weren't as strong as they needed to be to blow away houses. And so they knocked down the winds down to about 200 miles an hour. But you can see it's an upper bound. So I want you guys to remember these breakpoints here in the EF scale. EF1 to 2, 110 miles an hour. EF2 to 3, around 135. EF3 to 4, about 165. And then the EF5 is 200 or greater. Okay? So I want you to remember that, because you're all going to go to school in a little bit. Here's another one, the EF scale damage indicators. There's 28 of them. It's like much greater chance that we can now populate a tornado track with a lot better guesses than we could before with the F scale. And so that's really, really key. So it's all broken down. You got vegetation, you got telephone tower poles, metal building systems, professional building stores, even an auto showroom. And then commercial retail buildings, finally residences. Now, 95% of everything that we survey and we use as a damage indicator is going to be down here, 1 to 2 family residences. It's still going to be the same way. But trees is a big one too. Okay. So how do we do this? We actually go out there and we use this EF scale. And we try to match up the damage indicator. What is it? Is it a house? Is it a store? Is it something else, some other kind of building that we can use? And then we try to match the degree of damage with what we see in the guidance to what we see in person. right there. So, for example, the house on the left, we have a roof gone, so that's like degree of damage 6, okay? And so that would equate to, something like 120, 122 miles per hour of a typical wind speed, while the one on the right, well, that's got more than just a roof down, doesn't it? It's got a couple walls down, several walls down. And so we may upgrade that to DOD 7, or degree of damage 7, exterior walls collapsed. And so that boosts us up to a typical wind speed of 132 miles per hour. So that's typically, when we go out there and we see what we expect out of expected or typical construction, we're looking at the middle wind speed there, the one in blue. That's the expected wind speed. And so if we don't see anything out of the ordinary, that's the wind speed that we pick. But if we go and see something that's a lot stronger, let's say a building's got metal clips, it's got anchor bolts, it's got hurricane clips, or rafter clips, as you will, attaching the walls to the roof, we may go above expected wind speed. And if, on the other hand, it's not as good, we'll go with a lower, or let's say towards the lower bound. Well, what does that look like in reality? This is what you would expect. And this isn't art. This is an art that depends on experience. And of course, some people have a lot of experience and some not so much. And we try to give the kind of guidance out to the surveyors, what kind of things they should be looking for to evaluate whether you're towards the lower bound or maybe perhaps towards the upper bound. So you go out there and you see damage, and you only see maybe a few straight nails and poor attachment. Maybe there's no anchor bolts. Maybe they just literally just nailed the foundation to the stem wall, the bottom house. That's it. Then it's a lower bound. Maybe it's closer to lower bound. If it's typical construction, maybe there's clips, but not everywhere from the top of the roof down. Maybe some parts of the connections only have, toe nailing or something like that. Then it's probably somewhere near expected. And if you have clips and anchor bolts and everything all the way from bottom to top, that's what you expect for near upper bound. Can anybody pull 1,200 pounds? Okay. 400 pounds? Nope. I wouldn't even try it either. Maybe 200 pounds. You could probably heft it and just pull it straight up and so forth. Well, tornado's got a lot easier time of doing this. So when the EF scale was introduced, I was responsible for training up the Weather Service. So I developed a course with a team of people, and we put it out there, and we trained up the Weather Service in about 3 months. And that was back in 2007. So during the early winter time and late fall, that's what we did. So if you wanted to, you can actually look at that URL. And all you have to do is search for Warning Decision Training Division, or just say, you can search on Google, EF scale course. That's all you need to do, and you should be able to pull it up. So we did that in 2007, made some upgrades since then. We put it out there, and then it was our job to wait and see what would happen. And it didn't take long. How many of you remember the year of 2007? That was an awesome chase. And it didn't take long because we didn't have to wait for storms to get to the plains. In fact, the first day of February was this tornado in central Florida. It ran across a track northwest of Orlando and hit towns like Lady Lake and DeLand, and then went all the way off the coast south of Daytona Beach. And so when this happened, the next day I got a call from Weather Service headquarters saying, we want you to go out there and, make sure they're doing it right. So we're going to send you down to Florida and go along with them, see how the EF scale's working with the surveyors, making sure that they're trained up and everything works well. because we put in a lot of money invested into the F-scale, and we want to make sure it works right. So I went out and met up with the staff at the Melbourne, Florida office. And from there, we went immediately over to the National Guard Air group, which was nearby at the airport. And we started tracking out the storm. We got the LAN endpoints and fed them to the pilots. And the pilots took those and created a flight plan. And then we headed out to the tarmac. And I got to jump aboard a Black Hawk helicopter along with the rest of the crew and the TV crew. And we took off. And there I am with the laptop and a GPS puck and my camera. And now my job is to track the aerial survey from one end to the other. And this is the track we did. So here's the first opportunity, okay, to see how you guys will do with the EF scale. So I hope you've been paying attention. Okay, we're going to go to that right arrow. You see that one? Right in the middle of the track. And we run across this building here. Okay, so this is what was a church, and it's amidst a bunch of live oak trees. They've already set up a temporary tent and so forth. And so now I'm going to go ahead and show you what we typically do, and what we'd like to do is we follow up with a ground survey. We pick the buildings that we want to investigate a little bit more closely, and I'll show you that at least that's the after scene, or the before scene, there's the after scene. So you get an idea of what the change is like. Okay? So this is no slouch of a tornado. How many of you know about live oak trees? You've been in Florida or the southeast U.S.? Yeah. You know what the only trees were left standing after Hurricane Katrina along the Mississippi coastline? Live oaks. So when you see live oaks look like that, okay, we're talking about some serious butt-kicking winds. All right, so now we go to the ground, and this is what we have here. Okay, I won't make you remember exactly what every one of those 28 damage indicators were. So what we have here is a metal building system, but it was used as a church. And that's the key thing, is that we're having discussions now about, should we be rating buildings based on their occupancy type, like what are they used for, or their construction details, about how they're built. And so this one here is metal building system. It's a close-up of some of the rigid frames. You can see that we have a connector there that has been welded, but obviously a lot of that failed. And so I'm going to go to this table here. Let me go back. Take a look at this building here. And then I'm going to go ahead and select the volunteer. Any of you want to raise your hands, and I'll select you. And then you get to make the call as to what degree of damage this is and what you would rate it as. Okay? All right. So let's go to here. Now, of course, the only requirement of this is that you are able to read this. Okay. That might be a little bit harder from the back of the room. In fact, maybe I'll go back here and take a look. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to read to you the top. Yeah, my eyesight's not as good these days as it used to be either. Okay, so what it is that you look at the general description as a surveyor and say, yeah, this is an example of a warehouse, industrial facility, small arena, metal panel walls, standing seam roof, usually gable rooftop, which is that triangle that goes up, and has large overhead doors. Well, this building actually didn't have large overhead doors, so there's a slight discrepancy here, from what would be a typical storage building. But it has lots of rigid frame, steel frame, and there's other terminology down there, which I don't have to go through right now. The key thing, though, is, okay, may I have a volunteer? You can come up closer, and then you can read this, and then actually select it. So who would like to volunteer? By the way, I will pick somebody if no one does. Oh, we got one. Okay. Out of 300 people, you're the only volunteer. Congratulations. Come on up. The closer you are, the more likely it is. What's your name?
Jonathan Klepaski.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Why don't you come on up and go. I'll show you this here, and I want to thank you for being brave about this. And by the way, there's no wrong answer here. So what do you think? Threshold of visible damage?
I would have to say 6 or 7.
6 or 7, okay.
Yes.
So 6 is failure of X braces with lateral load resisting system. And 7 is progressive collapse of rigid frames. Do you want to perhaps think about, is it progressive collapse of rigid frames? Do you think that was the case?
I think so, yes.
Okay. So then what would you go for a wind speed then?
I would have to say EF3 range. I'll say about 140, 150.
140 miles per hour. Okay. Thank you very much, Jonathan. All right, give him a hand. Okay, see, that wasn't so bad, was it? All right. Yeah, 140. Okay, so Jonathan went with 140 miles per hour, progressive collapse of rigid frames. At the time, I think we just went with total destruction, which is 7 or 8, something like that. But you know what? It doesn't matter because I'm going to show you all the disagreements that occur even amongst the professionals. So it's not, you did actually very well. You say EF3, and really when we boil it down, okay, we're boiling it down to just 5 categories or 6 categories. And I think EF3 is what we put down. So even though we picked degree of damage 8, it's still EF3 when we go with the expected wind speed. As it turned out, this building was an engineered building. And an engineered building means that there are specific criteria for strength and rigid adherence to building construction codes. And so they know fairly accurately what a failure wind speed would be for that. And it turned out to be 150 miles an hour. So that was the first time that we actually applied this. All right, so we fly with our Black Hawk, and we flew further to the east. And we came across this community here on a pond called Lake Mac, Florida. This is somewhat closer to DeLand. And look at, this was a devastated community. It was a tragic loss of life here. This is a community full of mobile homes. You may see a couple of the frames still left on the ground. Again, this is a hurricane zone, by the way, and they require extra anchoring of the foundations. Extra anchors, like bigger augers drilling into the ground. And so we saw every single mobile home flattened here. If the foundation, or let's say the metal frame of the mobile home didn't leave the ground, everything above it did. So it's really a really bad situation. But we're going to check out point A. We look a little bit more closely to point A, and we're going to check out some trees. These are live oak trees. And now we're going to zoom in a little bit more. From the ground, that's the live oak tree that we see. You notice here, the trees are basically stubbed from the ground up. There's a live oak on the left, I think another type of oak there right in front of us. That's the meteorologist in charge of the Melbourne office, Bart Hagemeyer, who happened to be walking with me at the time. There's a chain link fence. Can you see the chain link fence itself wrapped around the tree and then stretched downwind? These are, when I see chain link fences do that, that's some serious, serious tornado damage. And you can actually see the chain link poles still left in the ground, but all the poles bent over. Okay, so here we have what we call a hardwood tree. There's oaks, maples, and other like beeches. And you can see that live oaks, of course, are probably about some of the hardest wood out there. And we have degrees of damage here. So one more chance for a volunteer to come up and tell me what you think this is. Anybody want to volunteer? You notice that I didn't tell anybody that you're wrong. Yes, a volunteer, fantastic.
So I know it's
Okay, what's your name?
Amanda.
Amanda? Okay, Amanda.
I'm going with a 5.
You're going to go with a 5, okay.
Trees debarked with only stubs of largest branches remaining.
Okay, yep, and that's what we went with too, so thank you very much,
You're
Amanda.
welcome.
Give her a hand. Yeah, this tree, I mean, it is stubbed, or what we call debarked, with only stubs of largest branch. I mean, it was just ripped to pieces. And so that gives us an expected wind speed of also EF3, 143 miles an hour. I was sitting there, I was looking at the ground, I was looking at the non-damage indicators, and I look at this stuff and I was saying, this stuff looks like EF4 damage, you know? But I couldn't say anything because the strongest DI that we had were these trees. Certainly not mobile homes. Mobile homes will blow away at EF2. But these trees, I could get 2 miles per hour over the EF4 limit if I went up to 167 miles an hour. And so, you know, I kind of thought about that, and so did my partner, Bart Hagemeyer, and we were thinking, okay, this is the first time we're rating a tornado with an EF scale. You know, do we really want to push it, you know, on the first time? So this is a non-meteorological consideration here, you know, and this happens a lot in rating tornadoes. The Weather Service is typically a conservative agency. They don't want to go out on a limb. And so we said, yeah, okay, let's go ahead. We're going to go above the expected winds because we know live oaks are tough trees. But we're not going to go and push it to the max. And so we left it in the 150s and then essentially called it, you know, EF3 here. So that was the second time there. I went back home, and then we waited for the next tornadoes. And about a month later, there were two. There was one in Blue Mound, Kansas on the first day of March, 2007. That one was a violent tornado. And then we had the Enterprise. Yeah, a few more of you. Awesome. This one here was an intense tornado. It was a very strong tornado. And unfortunately went right through the center of town and struck a high school. So back out, I went to Tallahassee, met up with the crew there, and immediately took upon ourselves to go up and visit with the Sheriff's Department in Enterprise, and met up with a combat flight instructor who happens to fly the sheriff's helicopter there. And man, that was fun. He basically, he took us up, and we just basically danced up and down between the trees all over the place until I got sick to my stomach. So airbag in hand, and one hand, camera in the other hand, documenting pictures, because I'm not going to let this opportunity pass. I'm not going to let my stomach interfere with me documenting this event. So we flew circles all over the place, and we did fly over the Enterprise High School. This is what it looked like here. So this brings up some issues here. You see parts of the school completely destroyed, other parts almost untouched. So what's going on here? This is a difficult one. By the way, 4 of the fatalities occurred in the center hallway here. The students did all the right things, to be honest. This is just an unfortunate situation that we have with schools and the way they're built. Tim Marshall here has run into this problem in Texas, where some of the similar kinds of damage patterns occur where literally walls will just collapse inwards, and then you just have a progressive failure across the whole system here because there's no anchor, there's no rebar in the concrete. Many times the gaps or the holes in the concrete masonry unit blocks are unfilled with grout. And so this kind of poor construction yields very little lateral resistance. And so with this progressive failure, the inner hallways many schools in the country are built like this. So now this is a violent tornado, very strong tornado, And so it's understandable what happens here. But at this point here, we had to go and do a ground survey, and you can see there's the concrete masonry unit blocks with no rebar, nothing up there. But since this is a typically, this is a typically constructed building, okay, the other problem was, do we treat the whole building as a single damage indicator? This high school was sprawling, was huge. The core of the tornado vortex was actually a lot smaller than the high school itself. So we decided to treat the building in segments and treat that area in which the core of the tornado passed overhead as an individual segment. So in that case, we went all the way to complete destruction of a section of the building with an expected wind speed of 192 miles per hour. But because of the lack of construction that we would want to see, I think, we decided, we can't go with expected wind speed, so we dropped it. We dropped it down. But even if we dropped it down, it was still, do you go all the way to 163 miles per hour? Yeah. That's better. Thank you. Okay, so do we want to go with 163 miles per hour, which is 2 miles per hour underneath the EF4 limit, or, play it a little bit higher than that? So we had the reverse problem that we had with the trees. And so we decided, okay, we're going to go ahead and move it towards the lower bound, but still keep it in the EF4 range in that area. It's not a high-end EF4 by any stretch of the imagination, but it was close. And then that led us to this day. So some years passed. But how many of you remember this day? Well, now the most hands I've ever seen. Far more than when I'm asking for volunteers, apparently. I don't know why. But I'm glad you remember this day, because this one was the signature tornado for this whole event, was Tuscaloosa, and I couldn't believe it. Were you guys watching it, live streaming? James Spann up live watching this thing? I mean, I turned on the live stream and looked at it, and my jaw dropped. I couldn't believe what was happening here. And it didn't take long before the Weather Service contacted me and saying, we're way in over our heads. It wasn't just me that they were calling, though. They called Tim. They called 140 storm surveyors from 3 different regions of the Weather Service. And even with that, with 1,200 miles of tornado track to cover, you can imagine how long it would take. They were still surveying 3 weeks afterwards. I went down and met up with the folks in the Birmingham office. And folks like Jim Stefkovich, who was the meteorologist in charge, John DeBlock, who was the warning coordination meteorologist, and so forth. And we charted out, and little did I know that I would be the one that would be driving around the director of NOAA, who also flew down. And so I was a little bit more concerned about not getting into a car wreck, as opposed to figuring out what are we going to do. But what we did do is we went up and visited with the emergency manager in Tuscaloosa, and then basically went over and toured some of the damage here. So we're looking at the EF scale document here, and I'm teaching the director of NOAA how to use it. And then I'm making her go out and make the call. So everybody has to go to work, by the way. We come across this one here. This is the Chaston Manor apartment complex. And when we get to it, we'll take a closer look here. Here's a photo. Tim was up in the air, so he was flying. He said, there's something really interesting going on that I think I need you guys to check out. And so that's what we did. I took the director of NOAA and everybody else, and we went over to the Chaston Manor apartment complex. Already, you see that picture subset there in the lower right? You see that manhole cover? See where it landed? It basically popped out of the concrete, basically out of the sidewalk there, and flipped over, and it landed in the stream basin, probably about 40 feet away. This happens with significant tornadoes quite a bit. So we looked around, and in fact, actually, when I go back, you can see that there are some apartment buildings that were scoured to the ground. A lot of them that lost their upper floors and pieces of lower floors, so forth. So it's extremely damaging tornado. And there was a slab clubhouse, and there's a little yellow cone pointing to the left. That's where I was taking the next picture. And this is this right here. So you can see that here we are, and we're not trying to figure out, is this tornado violent or not? Now is it EF4 or EF5? And so there are lots of considerations here. EF5, trying to figure out damage from EF5 is exceptionally difficult because most of the building stock in this country will get swept away well before that. And so how do you figure out when a building is swept away, whether it was EF4 or 5, when there's so little evidence? Well, some of it was, okay, the grass is bent over but not scoured. We have second floor apartments removed. We go here and you can see a closer look at some of those second floor apartments. We look at another picture here, the debris downstream. Exceptionally violent tornadoes often have pulverized debris. It's churned into little pieces. You think that stuff's churned into little pieces? Okay. Well, you know, 3 other teams went down there. There was one from the National Science Foundation, a quick response team. There's FEMA went down. And this is from the FEMA report that was done later on. And they're looking at, some of these apartments actually had anchor bolts, and some of them had rafter clips. So this is making it exceptionally difficult. Here's the closer up view of some of those slab apartments. Actually, this is a sloping grade, and so they basically stair-stepped the first floors. So that's actually a first floor there. And you can see that all of it is gone. So you would actually say, in this case here, almost total destruction of the top 2 stories. Well, it actually falls out the top of that degree of damage. The highest degree of damage officially is almost total destruction of the top 2 floors, but not slabs swept clean with debris blown away. So, man, this might say, oh, this might got to be an EF5, right? Because the upper bound of just this damage indicator and degree of damage is 205 miles an hour, so maybe it's higher. Okay, well, 3 teams, okay? I'm going to point out the difficulty here. Team 1 says, this is the Weather Service team, we went with 190 miles per hour, EF4. Why? Because the max degree of damage, well, matched observations, okay, maybe you might disagree with that, but the building code was current, and most building codes throughout the country are rated to 90 miles per hour, not anything more than that. I needed some more evidence. So a lot of the sill plates had straight nailing into the studs. And so we saw sill plates left, but not the studs, and the nails sticking straight up. So again, that's a straight nailing is not exactly optimal for pull strength, right? 220 pounds. Okay, and the context, maybe I want a little bit more context. Needless to say, 190 miles an hour is only 10 miles an hour under EF5. Okay. All right, well, the URS Corporation that's working for FEMA said, yeah, I didn't see any hurricane clips on the long span roof trusses. So that is a flaw that we determined. We're going to go with the EF4. The National Science Foundation, they went with EF5. 3 team members went with EF5. Why? Because they said, no, that slab swept clean is greater than the highest degree of damage that we have. More like a house degree of damage, slab swept clean. So we'll go ahead and just say, yep, that's evidence of EF5. Nail spacing was 6 inches on center. Southern, very good quality pine. It was a very new building. It was built in 2010. And so we're going with that. But then the other half of the team noted, well, I don't know, there's some lack of clips on the girders and the top plates to rafters, and the roof decking wasn't staggered to add strength between the rafters. And so they went with EF4. I didn't see any square plate washers, the 3-inch ones. Okay. So they think it was 180 miles an hour. Between the 4 teams, we only have, we're talking 180 miles an hour to 200 plus. All right, 20 miles an hour. When you're at that high in the range, 20 miles an hour isn't a big thing. But when it spans across 4 or 5 boundary, Oh, it gets political. Jeez. I mean, it's like snow or no snow. You know, you're off by 1 degree temperature, which is a dang good forecast, but it meant the difference between basically shutting down an entire city or not. That's exactly what we were dealing with. So I wanted to implore upon you, the uncertainty level causes complications, but we can't do anything about the uncertainty. These people are all experienced, and they're coming up with different ratings. All right, so yeah, uncertainty needs to be embedded in whatever we do when we're out there surveying, with whatever instrument we are using. Okay, another learning moment. We're going to go back to Enterprise Day and look at another tornado further west at Millers Ferry, Alabama. And this one here is a short-lived tornado, but it was no slouch, let me tell you. There's an aerial view that was taken. Literally stripped trees to the ground, leveled buildings, an absolute mess. And we're going to take a look at, in the bottom, you probably can't see it from the back, but there's like pictures 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to show you a picture aimed at the reservoir. And you look at oak trees, very strong trees, and you got a building, a house that was built, and you can see it back there. It was built to recent Georgia code. In fact, this is another new house, 2-story construction, and this is what's left of it. If you want to know what a building looks like that's slab that has square washers, this is it. And apparently my battery is running low. So I'm going to be like Beowulf. Remember that? My battery's running. Okay. So in a sense, you see the square washers right there? And they did a good job at holding the plate down in some areas, but other areas it looks like they couldn't do it. But you also see straight nails from the bottom plate to where the studs used to be. And now the only thing left are the straight nails. Okay. But needless to say, I mean, this is 4 or 5 right here. This is violent tornado damage. And in fact, this house was a fairly new house, fairly good quality wood. Okay. And this is the picture that was taken literally hours after the event by the emergency manager there. So you could tell that the debris was not removed by a tractor. It was removed by the tornado. But look at something else. If you want to, one thing we're taught as a surveyor is to always look at the surrounding context. And you see back there are a grove of trees left standing with narrowly a branch taken off. And those kind of trees on the edge of the reservoir, which is common in southern, southeastern U.S., are bald cypress. And bald cypress are notoriously strong, especially when they're young. But, you know, I'm looking at this and I'm going, okay, small limbs broken up to 1-inch diameter, about 100 feet upwind of a house that was slabbed. There's a slight disparity here, isn't there? Needless to say, I went with the small trees, right? Okay, but this is a learning point because this is where we have the problem with the tree damage indicators. And I'm alluding to where we're going with the EF scale here. I'm outlining problems now, and this is a big problem. At the time when the tree damage indicators were built, we didn't have much knowledge about tree performance in violent winds. And so we had certain assumptions. And some of those assumptions are wrong, and we didn't consider other things. And one of the things we didn't consider was tree size and tree species. Okay, yeah, they were hardwood and softwood, but they were really kind of aligned the wrong way. Bald cypress, young bald cypress trees probably bend to the ground and just snap right up. And if there's no debris blowing around, like there might not be here, then that's a problem. Really, tree diameter, a damage percentage of blown down trees, they're positively correlated. The bigger the tree is, the easier it comes down, which kind of goes against conventional wisdom, doesn't it? Because everybody goes, wow, did you see that? Man, that 4-foot diameter tree, that wind was strong enough to blow it down. Wow, was that impressive? Holy cow. But as it turns out, they should be more impressed by that sapling that didn't, or that one that blew down or something like that. So we need to reconstruct the current damage indicators and align it towards what the science says. And that's the important thing. The evidence shows tree size and species are important, along with other things. Tree exposure. Is a tree used to strong winds or not? If a wind blows in the wrong direction than what the tree is used to, it's likely to fall over a lot easier. Okay, so let's go on now. Anybody remember this storm? Yeah, a few. How many of you chased this one? You chased it. Yep. So it was an impressive storm, wasn't it? Yep. Hopefully you didn't run into it then. That's good. This one here, this is a picture I took. It's actually a video frame, and we were driving north from Coldwater, and we knew the storm was really potent because we saw the lightning just constantly flickering in the anvil as we're coming in from the south. And then we crested a hill, and what did we see? Giant wedge, right up there, and we just were floored. Unbelievable. And so we just kept driving north after it, and we're getting closer. It's off to the right side of the road, and then we hit the damage track. And then the damage track went on for 5 miles, and it became this maze of trying to weave our truck or car around damaged power lines, wires down all over the place. There's barbed wire across the road, so forth. By the way, I was driving a Toyota Prius. Truck or car, huh? And we got up there, and we hit the damaged track. We went into town, and we were just flabbergasted. And first of all, it's just a shock coming upon a disaster scene in the dark, and people are just emerging out of the rubble left and right. And we didn't know what to do. It's like, what do you do? We're not, we are not emergency responders or anything like that. So the one thing that we did do is we just went straight into the center of town to the gas station. It was a gas station where we pulled up, and immediately, there was a family with 2 kids. And another passerby came by and said, "Can we get a ride out of here? We lost our cars." So we packed our Prius with 2 families, basically from bottom to top, and we drove out to Pratt, dropped them off, and we figured, all right, we've done what we could do because the emergency responders were finally coming in at that time. And we let them off, and we re-engaged the storm south of Great Bend. And it was another tornado, and we finally said, we've had enough of this. So we went to the hotel in Great Bend and pulled up and went into the lobby, and there's everybody in the hallways with their hands behind their necks, crouched down, lined up, both sides. So that was a chilling scene. It's like, we're just coming in going, "Can we get a room, please?" And then they asked where we came from. We said, "Well, Greensburg." And they said, "It's on the house." And it's like, well, I don't know. I mean, did I deserve that? I'm not a victim. I'm just, I didn't say we were chasers. They probably would have doubled our rate, but, So, anyway, FEMA did this report, and we also did one. I was actually co-author with Tim Marshall on a report here looking at the damage in Greensburg. And I know Tim and other people in the Weather Service went up and looked house by house at the damage there and found incredible variability in the destruction of one house to almost no damage in the next structure. What's going on? Is this tornado full of microvortices and they're just missing certain houses, or is there something else going on? Well, it turns out some of it might be wind variations across short distances, but also we have the problem of we have different structures. Okay, we have a house here, a picture of a house in the upper left right next to a mobile home. And the mobile home blew away, and the house is almost untouched. Now, I doubt that those 2 structures that are literally 30 feet apart suffered incredibly different wind speeds. I think it's a little bit different than that. And it turns out, we see this kind of behavior a lot. We have damage indicators for mobile homes. And damage indicators for mobile homes says, complete destruction of the unit, debris blows away with an expected wind speed of 134 miles an hour for a double wide, for example. Well, that's practically EF3. But we've seen a lot of evidence where they just blow away with a lot less wind than that. And it depends a lot on the anchoring and so forth, but a lot of times it's because the structure itself is just made out of toothpicks. And so if the frame doesn't blow away with it, then it's going to be everything above the frame. But in this case here, we see a lot of this. And so mobile homes is on the chopping block. They slated for a major revision. And so that is something else that's going to come up. Okay, Literally, if we looked at those 2 degrees of damages, the house next to the mobile home, 97 miles an hour does not equal 134 miles an hour. I can tell you that much. And being that close, I doubt the wind gradient was that strong. I mean, I could be wrong, but this is a wide tornado. The wind was fairly uniform over at least that range. So this comes up to May 24th, 2011. This is the first El Reno tornado of recent times. How many of you have been on this storm or remember this day? Yeah, a few of you out there. I think there was a certain person that was watching exploding propane tanks or something like that. I think Jeff Petrowski was watching that. There was another, there were a whole bunch of structures on this day that were hit. I was going north of El Reno and ran into the tornado just north of there. That was the picture of it. That's where it was in its EF5 stage and surrounded by rain. Somebody else got in a lot of trouble that day because they couldn't see the tornado and they wound up parking. And then their video filmed a car in front of them blowing off the road. So this tornado hit this structure, the Cactus 117 drilling rig. This is 2 million pounds of steel attached to a well plug with about 2 miles of piping down below. So 2 million pounds, not just tipped over. It was blown after it was tipped over and blown sideways. All the oil crew members, the workers, employees, took shelter in what's called a change house in the lower right. A change house is basically an established tornado shelter that's anchored with 6-foot deep augers and strapped by 1-inch thick cables around it. Looks like it did a pretty good job. Everybody survived without a scratch. So anyway, we went out that day and we saw more non-damage indicators. Peeled road on the left near Blanchard, Oklahoma. Scoured vegetation. There's a vehicle. There's Tim right there. So you can see the size comparison between the vehicle and Tim. That's up by El Reno or near Piedmont, Oklahoma. Does anybody recognize what vehicle that is? What kind of make, car, year? It's red. That's right. Thank you very much. It was an excellent answer, and I'm glad you did that. I don't know how we found out what kind of vehicle. Did we interview somebody? I think we said, I think we interviewed somebody and said, hey, that was my Chevy Avalanche, or something like that. Okay, so if you don't have a tank, okay, and if you think your Chevy Avalanche is a tank, it's not. We came across this one. What do you do with this? Okay. That's a 1 and 2 family residence, isn't it? That's the occupancy of this building. People were living there. It was an older couple. Looking on the inside, you can see, oh, it did get cracked like an eggshell, didn't it? But look, nothing else wrong on the inside. You still got the railing upstairs, got the stairwell, you got rooms in the back. All the couple had to do was just retire into the back bathroom. There wasn't even dust in the back bathroom. But no, they watched the tornado through their picture window until it hit them. And then they got peppered with debris as the windows caved in. Luckily, they weren't really seriously injured. They got out. They had to visit the hospital, but they're okay. But this house is an excellent example of a pincushion that collects all sorts of debris, including kitchen steak knives. You can see there. So this is a poured concrete shell. Basically, it's a dome house. They built a steel rebar frame, so it has a continuous load path from the foundation all the way around. There's nothing for the wind to grab hold of, no eaves on a roof or anything like that. And you basically they built a frame, they inflated a balloon inside of it, and then poured concrete over it, like icing or something like that, right? And it's just dribbled over. And then it would freeze, and then they put this polystyrene insulation on the outside that makes the pincushion. We can't use the house DI in this. This is violent tornado damage for this house. So we need forensics. When we don't have a damage indicator, we need forensics teams to come out. Okay, how many of you remember this tornado? This was an awful year. Okay, we're driving north from Newcastle at this time, looking off to the north, and now our jaws are dropping. And then I got this sickening feeling again because in '99, that tornado took nearly the same track, and we knew what that meant. And it didn't look like it was going to die, and it didn't. So it was an absolutely disastrous event. Sometimes there are such things as being a little bit too much on a chase, because I certainly don't like to see things like this. We wound up doing one of the most exhaustive surveys in record afterwards. I was up in the air on the helicopter taking aerial surveys. We had multiple teams down below, doing literally house by house, damage indicator by damage indicator. 4,000 points we surveyed out of this thing. It's probably the most surveyed recent tornado in history. That's kind of contradictory, isn't it? Recent tornado out of history. But anyway, more non-damage indicators, including large oil tanks, in which one I think this one was transported the better part of a kilometer, more than half a mile. So we have, we need new damage indicators, and we need forensics for those structures that we don't have any guidance for. Okay, and I'm sure a couple weeks later, everybody remembers this day. And this one, I was actually driving south looking west at the tornado at the time. And at this point, we start transitioning. Now we have another issue. We have 2 mobile radar teams on this, out of University of Oklahoma and the Dows, okay, and even 2 Dows on that. And they're sampling the tornado, and they're seeing winds well in excess of VF5, 115 meters per second, which corresponds to a lot of wind. So we hit that, and there was another paper that Jeff Snyder and Tim and others looked at, and they basically took the max velocities that were found in the radar and did an analysis, and then looked at whatever structures were underneath it, and they saw a huge disparity. It was only EF3 damage. But the radar, of course, is depicting large areas of EF5. So actually, in this area where the EF5 is, there are no DIs. Well, initially, what happened was that the radar teams, reported the winds to the National Weather Service, and they immediately rated it EF5. That got the attention of headquarters, and headquarters says you can't do that. The directives say that you can only rate based on the damage. And so, grudgingly, the Weather Service said, okay, and they rated it, they downgraded it down to EF3, and that, of course, then yielded all sorts of unhappy responses and so forth, saying, how dare you take my EF5 tornado and only rate it EF3? I wanted to claim that I saw an EF5 tornado, and now look what you've done. Well, the thing is that, what is the truth? By damage, our best wind speed estimate is EF3. That's it. By radar, our best wind estimate is EF5. Okay? And so we have to come up with a resolution to this. And it's not just isolated to this tornado. If you looked at the climatology of all the tornadoes sampled by the Dows, and Josh and Karen can speak to this later, you can see that the average tornado, supercell tornado, the Dow sees is EF2. The average tornado sampled, the same tornadoes, by the way, as the Dows reported, is only F0. Now, these are plains tornadoes, areas lacking damage indicators because of low population. Okay, the other problem is, you got the radar sampling way up here. Well, okay, the F scale requires us to estimate a 10-meter wind. That is a 3-second gust. Okay, radar is more instantaneous, it's higher up. Well, how does that relate to a 10-meter value if your radar beams up to 50 meters? Well, everything you see in those red boxes over there, those are profiles sampled from tornadoes. And this is a paper that, of course, Josh wrote in 2007 after some 2005 tornadoes. And you can see from the sampling, from the radar down to the tornado intercept vehicle, everything in the red box, the wind was actually stronger at the height of the tornado intercept vehicle. But everything outside those red boxes to the left, the winds are actually less at the tornado intercept vehicle's altitude than the radar. So sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. And we got to figure out when it's most likely to be higher versus those cases when it's not. The one up in Goshen, Wyoming, in that case, the TIV reported higher winds than the radar, and quite a bit higher. So sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. And that yields all sorts of concerns with how we're rating tornadoes, doesn't it? And there are more issues and so forth. And we've written about this. I authored a paper. This is in the American Meteorological Society's bulletin. FEMA's authored papers. National Institute for Standards and Technology authored papers. And all say lots of things about, we got to correct this, we got to fix that, we got to do something. And so at the time, this is all through this time, and I've been taking you through a journey of all my experiences, and I'm thinking, we got to do something. And I couldn't get this out of my head. And so I started contacting people. I contacted people that were involved in the creation of the EF scale. I contacted engineers and meteorologists. I contacted forest biologists and others as well. And we set up this ad hoc EF scale stakeholders group back in 2010. We wrote the paper, like a position paper. And then I got hooked up with the National Institute for Standards and Technology, because we came up with the idea that we wanted to make a standard, and it sounded like NIST is into standards, right? So I contacted a lead in the National Windstorm Impact Reduction Project, whose name is Mark Levitan, and I asked, can you guys support us to make a standard? And he says, do you want me to be a secretary? And I said, this is not working out right. So I explained my cause and all that, and he says, oh, you should get with the ASCE, this American Society of Civil Engineers, who monitors and supports standards. And he actually agreed to join us and participate in that, and we set up a proposal back in 2014. There was a lot of contention in ASCE, like, should we do this? I mean, you're meteorologists, you're not even a ASCE member. Who are you? This is an engineering society. Some of these arguments are around, but eventually they saw what we were proposing and our concerns here, and even the potential that we may be undercutting the risk. And if the potential is there, we ought to be able to pursue this, and we should write a standard. And so I got a team together to do this. We announced the standard, and now that's where we are now. And we're looking at all sorts of things. But our whole idea is to develop a standard on all methods, estimating wind speeds, tornadoes, and other severe winds. And then we invited all sorts of people. We have people from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. We have people from FEMA. We have 66 associate members, 30 core members, all sorts of disciplines, construction to forest biology, horticulture, and everything else. And here we are at a meeting at Simpson Strong Tie down in McKinney, Texas, looking at some of their testing facilities during one meeting. And we have people from all branches of government in this, including lots of universities. We have people around the world. Why? Because I don't want this just to apply to us. I'm concerned about a global climatology. I want to know what people are doing in other countries. And I want to know if they're consistent the way we are. And if they're not consistent, I want to know how they're not consistent. And so I'm bringing everybody in, and basically we have lots of activities here. We have subcommittees. We have somebody. You notice every one of these subcommittees, there's one just for the EF scale. Okay? We have another one looking at tree fall patterns, and I'll talk about that later. We have remote sensing from satellite. We got engineering forensics, radar, anemometers. There's a lot of backyard anemometers these days, and some of them are getting hit. Well, are they any good? That's what we want to find out. We got archival. None of this is any good if we don't get buy-in from the Weather Service to have an official archive and to accept whatever that we decide how to improve how we measure tornadoes. International working group. And so, just talking about this, just looking at indirect measurements, the EF scale subcommittee itself has bunches of working groups looking at new DIs, modifying current ones, fixing the trees, and so forth. Speaking of trees, this one here is what we think we should be doing. Instead of hardwood and softwood, we ought to be looking at large trees and small trees. We ought to simplify a little bit, or at least realign it to what the science shows. This is one Tim made up, a proposed change to the standard house damage indicator. And the idea here is that we kind of divide things up 25, 50, 75%. 25% of the roof gone, 50% of the roof gone, 75% of the roof gone. What does that do? So this is only one proposed change to the damage indicator. There are others as well. New damage indicators, grain silos. They're all over the Midwest and the plains. Let's reflect them in the damage indicator here so we have some more guidance. So this is a proposal. How about train cars? Yep, they blow over, but not equally. If they're full, it's quite a bit different than when they're empty. And you can see that reflected in the wind speeds, literally from marginal hurricane force to EF4. Churches. Here's one, a Journey Church or Heritage Church. This one here is, you can see a solid masonry structure with thick walls, no doubt. And usually, older, but you can see that we have some of the winds. This is adopted from Canada. They made some changes to the EF scale, and here we are. How about Jersey barriers? I never knew these could blow around, but they did in Mayflower, Arkansas, back in 2014. And so some serious science has been done. Somebody actually did a wind tunnel testing up in Iowa State. Or actually, no, I think this is up in Western University in Ontario. So we have some hard numbers, some hard forensic numbers to go by. Other ones. Did you know that there's actually been a study in Japan on road surface removal by tornadoes? I bet you didn't know they had tornadoes that strong, but they do. And that's typical of around the world. The tornado threat around the world is generally way underestimated by various amounts. Fire stations, fire machinery, and et cetera. But it's not just the EF scale that we're looking at. We're also looking at other methods. Here's one. Tornadoes fell trees in patterns. Many times you can take those patterns and then compare it to, let's say, a vortex model run across a field of simulated trees. And if they match up, you can get an idea of what the wind speed characteristics are. There's a few different kinds of flavors to this method, and so we have a team looking at that. They applied it to the Joplin tornado, and in this report, anywhere along the path, you can get a time trace of the wind based on this method, and you can compare it to other methods like the EF scale, so forth. So this is really, I think, very, very useful. Forensics, this is a case when I got a call from Midland, Texas, and they looked at a pump jack that fell over, and they go, I don't know what to do with this. It's not an EF scale DI. What do you do? So I took this to some engineers, and we did some forensics on it. We got the parameters from the company that operated this pump jack, and they came back and said, yeah, 70,000 pounds, overturning moment, 151,000 pounds. And you do the calculations, it comes out to 160 miles an hour. Immediately, the Weather Service rated the tornado EF3 and said it was the strongest tornado in Midland's county warning area since Saragossa, Texas, 1987. And I went, whoa, that was a little fast. So other complicated forensics, you can actually model building behavior, apply wind speed across it, and they have very detailed finite element modeling that you can actually calculate, and you can run different variations of the wind speed and come up with probabilities of failure. And in Joplin, this is the Walmart building. The observed is that on the left there, with the roof gone in the upper left, and you look at it and compare it with the model, and it matches, and you go, this is the wind speed. That looks reasonable. And with uncertainty values on either side, but at least you get a range of wind speeds. Speaking of uncertainty, we can take the forensics and look at the wind speed envelope that causes a roof to blow off, for example, and then compare it to our upper and lower bounds and go, they're a little bit off. Maybe we ought to adjust it. We have some science now behind it. And remote sensing, this is another one. This is, large scale and small scale. What does the tornado track look like from above? How intense is it? What can be used to support everything down below? So yeah, drones count as remote sensors, don't they? Very good ones too. And they're getting popular. Weather Service is buying up drones. Okay, direct measurements. Yes, Denver got struck by a tornado. Well, the airport did. And there was an anemometer, got 97 miles per hour. We could not use this. This tornado was rated EF0. And if we have another method, we could say, okay, yeah, no damage, but we have this anemometer trace, so here's another method that says nearly 100 miles an hour. As long as the anemometer survives, right? This was Tipton, Oklahoma, November 2011. Okay, let's go to radar. This is the final thing. I think this is a segue to what Josh and Karen are going to talk about, but everything, including government radars to everything else, and mobile radars, we have a method, we'll develop a method to analyze that, and that one's actually supposed to go, but it didn't. And photogrammetry is the last one here. This is a picture of the Katy tornado, and let's see if we can go ahead and run that. I did some photogrammetry with this, and got a range of wind speeds on various objects and things like that. Wow. And wow is right. So
it's crossing the road.
Nice tornado. Unfortunately, it was a kind of a killer tornado too. So remember, everything we're going about and going forth is trying to find wind speeds and various ways of measuring wind speed. That's the ultimate thing the users want to assess our risk to tornadoes and react to it by building better building codes, making better codes and making people stick to them, like the city of Moore, Oklahoma, is starting to do right now. And I think that's the key thing. So we're expecting to finish this standard in 2019. Well, that's all I have right now. So, and I have no time, or do I? Yeah.
So in areas like Dixie Alley, as opposed to the plains, where there's a lot of surface water, is there a change in the effect or impact because of the density of the tornado that's picking up surface water as it moves along?
The question is there a change to tornado behavior because it runs over surface water versus, let's say, tree-covered ground? Yeah, there is actually, because you have less friction down below, so it can cause a change to a parameter that we call the swirl ratio. Basically, how much spin is there relative to inflow. And if the swirl rate, often it'll wind up getting more spin and less inflow. And that can affect, the distribution of the strongest winds around the vortex. Oh, hang on a second, let me get you right back here and I'll get to you.
If you've got two tornadoes that's identical and one's running 50 miles an hour and the other one's going 20 miles an hour, you see a difference in the damage of that?
Okay, so the question is, if one tornado is going 50 miles an hour and the other's 20, yeah, you'll see the damage shift to the right of the vortex center. And then it could be, on the left side, no damage, because...
Will that make a difference in the amount of damage, if it sits over a house for a longer period versus just a short?
Yeah, and so otherwise also is duration account. Well, yeah, it's kind of, 6 one way and half a dozen the other, because a faster tornado, if the vortex itself is the same strength but moving faster, you could get faster winds, but less duration. And both of those may cancel each other out or, affect, the final result in some way or so. Yeah, there is an impact on there. Gerald, Texas, by the way, 97 was an excellent example of a tornado just sitting over a neighborhood for up to 5 minutes. And it was probably the most severe damage of anything. Let's see, yeah.
How do you deal with anomalies like a house with dining room walls are all gone, but the table's sitting over the base? Or like your slide where you have a building that's been wiped off foundation, but a mobile home right next to it. I mean, it's got to affect your fine tuning of it because it makes no sense.
Yeah, that's where the art comes in. So the question is, what do you do with anomalies? Like, degree of damage doesn't agree with the guidance, or you got conflicting degrees of damage. I don't know. I tend to go with the higher one just because I like to exaggerate things. If it's reasonable, though, there better be agreement. If there is an agreement, then something stands out and doesn't look right, sticks out like a sore thumb, I won't go with it because, yeah, I'll disregard it. It's got to look good in its context. Greensburg, there were plenty of destroyed houses and so forth, so it's more of a function there of, the small scale kind of variations were interesting.
You mentioned Greensburg, and to me, a lot of those trees, that was EF5, right? And a lot of those trees that you showed in one of your other photos look just like Greensburg to me, but said was rated as EF3 because of the trees. Well, I didn't see a big difference.
Yeah, you didn't see a big difference between, let's say, Miller's Ferry and Greensburg. And there probably wasn't at all. It's just that Miller's Ferry, well, not Miller's Ferry, but Lake Mack in Florida, didn't have any candidates to allow us to make a higher estimate. So what we estimated was actually a lower bound.
So is the end goal of your process to have a new way for the National Weather Service to estimate how strong tornadoes are? The idea is to get this adopted by the NWS again.
Yeah, is the new goal just for the National Weather Service to come up with a new way? Yes, and more than that. Every stakeholder that goes out and estimates tornado strength will be affected by this. I don't know. I have no idea how much time passed. So.
Was it?
Do we have enough time, or did I run over?
We're about 15 minutes.
Okay.
That's okay. That's okay.
Very good. Yep.
Have you ever seen any damage indicators from ground scouring, grass, crops? I'm thinking remote areas where you don't have structures.
Yeah, damage indicators for ground scouring. There's a proposal for that, for ground scouring. It's not easy because it requires a certain kind of tornado that has a very strong corner flow where the wind just drills down into the ground. And some EF5 tornadoes may not have that much of a corner flow. Yep.
Did you at all work with the survey team for the Washington, Illinois?
Washington, Illinois. No, I don't think I did with that one.
That one did have some scouring there for sure.
Washington, Illinois had scouring, no doubt. Yeah, that was a very intense tornado. All right.
Great. All right, thank you very much, Jim. That was outstanding. We really appreciate it. Hey, folks, before we take a quick break, before our next speaker, there's a couple things I want to say. First of all, we had a photo contest, and those photos are all on the back table back there. And we would also like to thank Gary Schmidt, who actually sponsored the photo contest. And one person I'd like to recognize here real quick before we take a 15-minute break, Mr. Bob Glancy. Bob, could you stand up for a second for us? Bob, for years, I've known Bob for almost 3 decades, and Bob every year is the gentleman who conducts the basic and advanced spotter training for the National Weather Service at ChaserCon. Bob was the warning coordination meteorologist for the National Weather Service in Denver, and he has just retired from the National Weather Service. And Bob, congratulations, and thank you for your support over the years for ChaserCon. And with that said, we're going to take a 15-minute break real quick. Remember that the Doppler on Wheels trucks is parked out through those doors, out into the parking lot on the northwest side, so please go check it out.
Check 1. Check 1, 2. Check 2, 3, 4. Check 1, 2. Check 1, 2, 3, 4. Check 1, 2. Check 1 2. Check 1 2. Check 1 2.
Okay, folks, come on in. Let's grab a seat and get the show going again. Okay, folks, let's go ahead and grab a seat, please. Let's get the show going again. All right, it's my pleasure to introduce our next speakers. We always see Dr. Josh Wurman and Dr. Karen Kosiba out on the road with the Dows and all the research they're doing, and it's our pleasure to have them here to talk to us about all their most recent projects. So Karen and Josh, the floor is yours.
All right, I guess I get to start here. We're doing a bit of a tag team talk, so you don't get too bored of either of us talking. So I'm going to start out talking about this TWIRL project that we just did in 2016, and Josh is going to talk a little bit more about it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the in situ analyses and the damage stuff that we're doing. It's a good follow-on about what Jim was talking about. So basically looking at radar winds and how that corresponds to what we're seeing at the surface and what we're seeing damage-wise. So just basic motivation. You guys have probably seen the slides a bunch of times. But really what we're trying to do is we're trying to correlate. We have these radars. You see us out there with them. And we're scanning 15 or 20 meters above ground level, so above house height. But we want to know what these winds that we're seeing with the radars, what they're actually doing at house level. And then also we have these pods that we drop, and I'll talk more about that. We want to see how those winds all correspond in a height profile type of way. So the tricky thing is that old picture there on the right, is that tornadoes come in different flavors. So all tornadoes don't have the same wind distribution, they don't have the same boundary layer, and that really complicates trying to understand what's going on inside. So just because we observe one tornado doesn't mean we know what's going on in every single tornado out there. So we're trying to get a huge sample of different types of tornadoes and different types of tornado configurations. So this is Russell, and if you haven't heard the Russell story, I always just say, buy me a beer, we can tell you about it later. This data set probably never ever will be repeated, but it's actually a fantastic data set in the sense that we had our radars out there, and we got a bunch of height profiles. We got them as low as 5 meters above ground level, which don't ask why that happened. And then we also had a mesonet observation, which was under the radar in the tornado. So we got something down to 3 meters as well. And the fantastic part about that, besides the fact that we all are telling the story, is that we were able to see that the strongest winds were occurring very near the surface. So the strongest winds were really occurring about 5 meters above ground level, which is super shocking because we did not expect that result. So strong winds were occurring very near the surface in this. And what we want to see is how true is this profile for other tornadoes? Again, just because it happened in this Russell, Kansas case doesn't mean it's going to happen in every single tornado. So this TWIRL project, and anytime I show you a map that shows it's going to Montana or Minnesota, you know, it's sort of a desperate year for us. But the idea of that is that we're basically trying to get all these tornado samples the best we can. And you see, obviously, there's only 2 little tornado icons there. So that was our success, but there's people here that participated in this project. We were very ambitious. We went over 16,000 miles. We had about 20 people out there. We had a lot of our instruments out there. Again, really trying to get these profiles. So I won't go through this. We had 2 of our radars in conventional scanning mode. We have this rapid scan radar, which is actually the one outside, maybe, which is really cool because you could see 6 different levels all at once. So instead of doing 1 level going up, 1 level going up, you actually get 7 seconds and you get 6 different levels. So that's great for getting these height profiles, and that's what I showed you in that Russell, Kansas case. We also had out 3 of our mesonettes. Again, not trying to get the mesonettes hit. They were actually out there dropping the pods. So we had 14 pods that we had out there that we were trying to put in the path of the tornado. And people like Tim and Ed were our teams out there doing that. So we had a pretty good team of people out there. A general strategy for doing this kind of stuff is there's a tornado that forms, and we're actually pretty picky. We actually do wait till the tornado forms because we really want to get in the path of the tornado. We don't want to predict too much where it's going to go. But even with that said, that red line there that shows what we would think the path of the tornado is, obviously there's a lot of uncertainty of where the tornado is going to go at that point. But what we're doing is we try to get our instruments close to where we think that's going to go within that path, within that uncertainty. We put our radars close, we put our radar sort of forward locating, and what we're trying to do here is just get continuous profiles of the tornado as it keeps going along its path. And then we have these pod teams dropping these pods where we're predicting the path of the tornado to go. And what we hope is not just one pod gets hit, we hope that a whole slew of them get hit, just because we want to get radial profiles. So we don't want just the point in one part of the tornado. We want to see what the winds do as a function of radius along the tornado. So we're trying to get 3, 4, 10 hit by the tornado if possible. Simultaneously, so that's the pods. So these are these 1 meter observations we're working to get. Simultaneously, we have our radars out there scanning at different heights. So 10 meters, 20 meters, 25 meters, so we can get this vertical profile. So we'll get this 1 meter observation, and depending on how close the radars get, 5, 10, 15, 20, and we could see what these winds are doing as a function of height. And we could correlate that then what's happening with damage. We can correlate that what's happening when we see observations on our radar higher up. So I'm going to talk quickly about sulfur. And sulfur happened May 9th, for those of you out there. There's a lot of things that went wrong, but there was enough things that went right in this particular intercept that we got a lot of awesome data in it. So there was damage that occurred in sulfur, and we had one of our radars working out there and scanning very close to the tornado. We were about 1 kilometer from that. And our pod teams deployed pods, in particular Tim here deployed the magic winning pod, so we got a ribbon at the end of the season. But basically, Tim deployed a bunch of pods, and one of these was very close to the radius of maximum winds. He doesn't get the blue ribbon, he gets the red or green ribbon, because it was still in the core flow, but not in the radius of maximum winds. But still a fantastic observation in terms of what we're trying to get and what we're trying to understand in terms of tornado flow. Also, unfortunately, there was damage that occurred around there, but for the scientific perspective, we got a pod, we got our radar data, and then there was also damage that we can correlate as well. So the maximum winds we saw with our radar were 97 meters per second. And this pod, like I said, was slightly outside of the core region, but still within the tornado flow, what you consider the tornado flow, and it had winds of about 50 meters per second. At a slightly earlier time. So at 1 meter above ground level, that pod was seeing winds of about 50 meters per second. And I'll talk more about how that correlates then with our radar observations. So just stepping this through quickly in time, this is a sulfur tornado. And if any of you are out there, it was a very big tornado. It was complicated flow, not your nice, laminar one-up and tornado. And that yellow there, that's the wind barbs from the pod. And then the blue, that's the mesonet corrected towards ground relative. They were thankfully making their way away from the tornado. But if you watch this step through, you could see the winds in the pod change direction and speed. You can also see the mesonet going south on that road. Good move. That's the time of maximum winds in the tornado. And then it crossed over the road, and we stopped scanning. So real quick, again, just to talk about what we're really trying to get at, besides these pretty pictures, is really, I just want to say there's yellow dots and blue dots and all these different dots. The yellow ones were from the pod, and the blue were from the radar. And all I want to say here is that we see about a 50 to 60% reduction, or 60% of the winds, let me say that one more time. The winds we see at radar level at 1 meter, they're about 60% less than that is what we were seeing in this case. So we had winds at about 20 meters above ground level, and in the case of the pod at 1 meter, we were seeing winds that were about 60% of that value. And that's starting to become true for a lot of different cases that we're seeing. Just to mention again, this was a very complicated flow, and Paul Robinson, who's here, tracked all these vortices. So there's a big main vortex, but there's a lot of these small little vortices. And actually a lot of these small little vortices, when we looked at the damage and where the damage occurred, were actually responsible for a lot of the damage that happened during this tornado. So for example here, that little one crossing the road there, that little vortex there was correlated to the damage that occurred at that location. In terms of the pod, again, this was just slightly north of the tornado core flow, and you could see the damage that occurred. That was a pretty well-built house in that case, but the shingles were removed from the roof, and from the outbuilding, the door was blown out. So the other quick one I'm going to talk about before handing this over to Josh, same type of thing. This was in Dodge City, Kansas, and sort of like sulfur, enough things went right that we got good data here. And if you saw, I was in a ditch at a certain point, but we were still scanning. I just want to emphasize that. So we kept scanning while the whole Dodge City thing was going on, and we were level for quite a while. And as you can see in this loop, and you probably all heard Dodge City had, I don't know how many tornadoes. But again, this was another complicated tornado structure. So in this case, I'm just showing 2 of the tornadoes, one of them occluding off to the west there, and then the one to the east forming as well. And then these aren't loops, but just looking at dying tornado, new tornado. There was an anticyclonic tornado at one point. There was this big 2-kilometer circulation with small little bead-like tornadoes in there as well. And you could see in the row HV signature as well. Some of these small ones even had little debris signatures too. So a very complicated evolution at that point. And I'm sure if you guys have looked at the Dodge City damage survey, you could see what they're showing too. So a similar type thing, we dropped a bunch of pods here. I can't remember who had the winning pod in this one. But there were 2 pods in particular, pods C and B, that were pretty much at or near the core flow of the tornado at that point. And similar to what we saw in the sulfur case, we saw that winds at about 1 meter were still about 60% less than what we're seeing in the radar at about 20 or 25 meters above ground level. Again, these are just 2 cases. These are obviously 2 complicated tornadic structures, but just showing you an example of that. And what we're doing right now and what we're looking at is we're looking at the damage path what the Weather Service did based on their damage assessment, and then looking at our data and seeing how that matches up with all these different vortices and stuff that they saw in their damage assessment. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Josh, who's going to talk a little bit more about some of the dynamics and actually looking at the 3-dimensional structure of these tornadoes.
Okay, thanks. So everything Karen was showing you was single Doppler data, and that's what we get most of the time because it's much easier to get one radar in the right place with a tornado than get 2 of them there. However, for some of the kind of science we're trying to do, it's probably 10 times better getting 2 radars there because we can actually look at vector winds. All the physics that's going on in a tornado, all the physics really in the atmosphere, is all based on vector wind quantities. Particle, you have convergence, that's a vector quantity. Vorticity, that's a vector quantity. And being able to calculate updrafts and downdrafts, really what's happening in the storm, these are vector wind quantities. And to get those, we need to deploy 2 radars on the tornado. Now, this time we actually had 2 dowels there, but one of them wasn't working. But fortunately, the University of Oklahoma had their radar there, and they just had 1 radar too, and we were able to combine data from the 2 different groups. I'll go back. And by combining that data, we got a really interesting data set, really for the first time ever, resolving some sub-tornado scale structure in vectors, which I'll show you. Now, what we're trying to look at with these resolve, and really for the first time, are these multiple vortices in the tornado. So you see there's a radar couplet of a big tornado, but there are a lot of small couplets in between. Sometimes these tornadoes have very complex structures. So broadly, there's inbound and outbound, but there's lots of multiple vortices, all sorts of different places. Sometimes this is the reflectivity. You're supposed to have a tornado eye, but you see there's little sub-eyes in there. Very, very complex structures. We've seen these a lot with this single Doppler, but what we're trying to do is understand more quantitatively what's happening with dual Doppler. So what happened is that tornado, the sulfur tornado, was moving to the east, as you saw in Karen's loops. We had the pod that was dropped there, the mesonet, basically got a transect like that, and then down and over. But we had one of our radars here, the Dow 7, and then we had Raxpol there, and then the Rapid Scan Dow, which failed, was right there. But when the tornado was out there, we were able to look at the Doppler from 2 different locations. And we were able to get those vector winds, which I'll go into for a second. It's a very challenging area. Those of us who do radar work, I know there's probably lots of people who chase east of I-35. We hate it, just hate it, hate it, hate it. It's a horrible place to do radar work for, trees, hills, towns, roads that aren't straight. I mean, this is, there's nothing good from a radar perspective. That's sort of what I see when I look out the window is welcome to the jungle, for those of you who are old enough to remember that guy. Our radar failed. Raxpol was out there, and just to spread the blame of being goofy with radars, they weren't level. They had all kinds of issues too, but finally they were working too. It's very challenging to get these radars out there and working and doing all that right at the right time. Our rapid scan radar was there, and it was in a good place and all that, and it just wouldn't turn on quick enough. When they get themselves turned on, but the tornado's over, it's not like you're sitting in your office with your computer and can wait 2 or 3 minutes. Tornado's over by that time. So basically, Dow 7 is up to the north of the tornado, looking southwest, and it sees this Doppler image. Raxpol is down here to the southeast of the radar and sees that Doppler image. And they sort of look qualitatively the same, but using some math, basically the dual Doppler equations, there's a unique solution. There's a unique vector which gives an inbound of that and a sort of 0, or over here an outbound of that and an outbound of that. There are unique solutions we can get. There are unique vectors which do that. And we can see what those are. Looking closely here, again, you can look at the view from the 2 different radars. And it's very different perspectives. Raxpol here is seeing a very strong kind of subvortex here on the west side of the tornado. There's evidence of it here in Dow 7, but from the particular geometry we were looking at that second, it doesn't look so impressive. But by combining these, we can really quantify what's going on there. From Dow 7 over here, you can see it looks almost calm because, of course, the wind is crossways to that tornado. But we know it's not because looking from Raxpol there, you see a very, very strong wind. So not showing the vectors first, just showing the kind of quantities we can get. We could basically do those dual Doppler analyses, and at different times, and I'm just showing these very, very quickly. We have several different times where we have dual Doppler. We can contour vorticity, a vector quantity, and look and see that there's a basically ring of vorticity in this particular tornado, perhaps not surprising given that particular tornado structure. But we can really learn things about the tornado's kinematics, hopefully dynamics, from resolving these vector quantities. We can trace these individual subvortices and relate them to individual vorticity centers, which is really the first time we've been able to do that. Looking at the vector wind fields, and these are a little hard to see here, but we can track these individual vortices and individual subvortices, individual vorticity centers, and track them around this tornado, look at what their speeds are, and see that they're propagating sort of like what we would expect. They're kind of Rossby waves in the tornado there. So what they're really doing is propagating upstream a little bit, but the tornado's revolving really fast. So the vortices still go the same direction, even though they're propagating upstream in the tornado flow. We can basically resolve what was kind of a wave number 4 type structure in this tornado. Again, rapidly changing all the time, but we have a certain number of waves, which in this case are actually closed circulations, just like you'd see on a planetary scale or in a hurricane with little mesovortices in it. So it's pretty exciting. Also, not only vorticity, but we can resolve convergence and divergence. And in this particular tornado, we saw that there was a strong central downdraft. Those blue areas are the strong central downdraft, and the yellow sort of blur there are really contours of vorticity. So we have a lot of vorticity in a ring, and then a strong central downdraft in the center. And it's kind of chaotic, but indications of updrafts associated with those small subvortices. So we're still looking at this data. It's pretty fresh, but it's really exciting that we finally got something at this scale by having by far the finest scale dual Doppler in a tornado that we've ever been able to get. And that's probably the last slide of that. Oh, no, sorry. we have some coarser data. We try to do the same thing up in Dodge. As Karen was showing you, it was a much more successful pod deployment than it was dual Doppler deployment. In this case, we only had one radar working, and Raxpol was way out of play down there. Our other radar was broken over there, but we were able to do dual Doppler with the WSR-88D in Dodge City. Not a perfect radar for studying tornado structure. It's got kind of coarse resolution. It's scanning slow, but occasionally there's slices through. And those two prominent tornadoes that you saw in Karen's slides, you could see them basically, and we've resolved the vector winds in them and looking at vorticity. Not close enough in this case in order to really resolve any kind of sub-tornado scale structures in those. So we're doing what we can, and these rare cases where we get two radars with crossing angles right on the right tornado at the right time, we're trying to push our observational science forward, looking at the real kinematics of these subvortices. And that's probably it. Here, aren't you next with, oh, there's another one. And then you're next. Oh, thanks to all the participants, a whole bunch of people there. I don't know who's in the room here. Paul, Tim, Alicia peeking out there. I don't know who else is in the room, but anyway, we have tons of people out there who just do a really tremendous job getting us not only close to the tornadoes, but getting all this stuff and computers and radars working. So for those 2 minutes when it matters, we're getting some good data. Now it's done. There you go.
Now it's done. And now we're done talking about tornadoes. So after tornadoes happen, we obviously do a lot of other projects besides TWIRL and Rotate and these vortex projects. There's a lot of other things we're working on. And the one I'm going to talk about quickly is the PECAN project, which happened in 2015. So basically, once you guys are done chasing for the day and things go upscale, the PECAN project came out and was in Kansas and Nebraska and Oklahoma, looking at these big MCSs, so looking at these big nighttime convective systems. So looking at, first of all, how they initiate, how they intensify, and how they sustain themselves at night, because as you know, at night, all the forcing, all the energy, it's all aloft. So how do these storms sustain themselves and keep going? And some of these storms actually produce severe winds at the surface. So even though it's nighttime, even though there's these big broad storms, they're still making surface winds. So it's a big forecasting problem. This is a huge project funded by National Science Foundation, NOAA, NASA. So there were tons of people out there. And it had 3 different objectives. So looking at, like I said, first of all, the initiation, how things initiate at night. So even if it's not something that's going upscale, sometimes things actually just initiate at night. Looking at the low-level jet, the role of that in this initiation or the sustaining of these storms. Looking at bores and how they also sustain these storms. And then what our sort of interest was as CSWR, as scientists in that project, we're looking at these MCSs, these hopefully big wind-producing systems for our research interests. There's a lot of stuff out there. I'm just showing you pretty pictures of lots of stuff. Lots of surface stuff, pods, mesonettes, soundings, PISAs, these wind profiling systems. There's 3 different aircraft out there, University of Wyoming, NOAA, NASA had an aircraft out there, NCAR had out their big S-pole radar, which was stationary for the project. They take that out for projects. It was just south of Hayes for 2 months. And then we had a bunch of mobile radars. So basically anybody who had a mobile radar was taking part in this project, Alabama, NOAA, Oklahoma, us. And we did something slightly different, and I'll tell you about our deployment strategy for MCSs in a second. And then we also had a bunch of stuff that we just sort of brought out because we wanted to look at some things. So CI, basically CI, you're looking at a lot of clear air at night. This is what clear air looks like at night. The bottom one being velocity, the top one being reflectivity. And again, this is after dark. So after dark, you're watching this boundary layer evolve. It's very stable, but yet convection is still initiating. So people are looking at how that's happening or why that's happening. The low-level jet, people are looking at the role of the low-level jet and how that might play a role into looking at that. So even though the low-level jet necessarily isn't associated with precipitation, you could still look at it radar, and you could still look at the structure of it and see how that interacts. So this is an example of a low-level jet. Again, you're just looking at clear air here, but this is the boundary layer. So really cool. You could see a lot of structure there. You could actually see a lot of linear lines, right? You could see some hexagonal stuff going on there. And then the joke here is all the mosquitoes come out, and I think it was actually moths there. So at night, what you're looking at in the boundary layer is a lot of bugs. So once that boundary layer lights up, all the bugs have come out to play. So you could look at it in this perspective. You could also look at it, these are called RHIs, where we do these vertical cross sections through. And you can see the low-level jet obviously has a fantastic vertical cross section. That maximum of wind right there, that's the low-level jet kicking up as it's becoming dark at night. And as you guys know, sometimes that also can initiate tornadic storms, but a lot of times it's helpful in sustaining these MCSs or the CI after dark. Bores, maybe people aren't so familiar with these. These are sort of these waves that propagate out of convection, and sometimes they also can initiate some more convection or sustained convection that's already going on. So looking at MCSs, this is our focus. I just wanted to give you an overview of PECAN. Basically, again, we had all these instruments, aircraft, everybody flying, but what I want you to look at is the radar hexagon. So instead of, we just talked about TWIRL and piling on radars and trying to get really close. What we did for this is we basically went out 2 hours before the MCS was forecast to go over a particular spot. We set up this nice complicated hexagon, depending on how many radars we had, depended on what its shape looked like. So they went to these predetermined sites. It became dark out. The MCS basically rolled over them, and they collected data for 4, 5, 6 hours as the MCS came over them. So what we were looking at in particular was this, again, these severe wind-producing MCSs. So in Nebraska, Kansas, this is a big forecast problem because on the 88D radars, the forecasters, they're looking and they see these strong winds aloft, they see these strong winds on the 88D, but they really don't know if these winds are actually making it down to the surface. And sometimes they do and sometimes they don't, and they don't know when is when. So we were looking at that. So again, like I said, a lot of times once it becomes night, you get this nocturnal boundary layer. It's a very stable boundary layer. Basically, all your CAPE, everything of interest is above that. So the idea is that things stay elevated, that you don't get stuff down to the surface. But the real question is, we don't actually, or one of the hypotheses is that we don't get the nocturnal boundary layer as fast as people think we get it. So that we're still sort of having a daytime boundary layer for a little bit after dark, and that daytime boundary layer a little bit after dark actually is helpful in getting these severe surface winds down. So PECAN was supposed to operate in Nebraska and Kansas, and just like I showed you that TWIRL map where we ended up in Montana, for PECAN we ended up in Minnesota and Wisconsin and Illinois. Same type of thing, you get desperate at a certain point. But we basically did the same thing. These are our radars and doing this dual Doppler with pods. So looking at what the 3D winds are like Josh was talking about that we were doing for that TWIRL project, but then also having surface observations, seeing what the winds are like at the surface, seeing what the thermodynamics are like at the surface. So this is just a quick overview. This is our reflectivity there, and what's contoured you can't really see. That's the potential temperature at the surface, so some idea of the buoyancy at the surface. And we're looking at buoyancy differences and buoyancy gradients, and greater buoyancy gradients sometimes might lead to stronger surface winds. And we're also looking at the depth of the inflow layer in these storms. So we had a bunch of mesonets out there, we had a bunch of pods out there, and they were taking the same type of measurements they do in tornadoes, except just in MCSs. And I only have this picture here just to show you how ridiculous this project became at a certain point. That's a cliff. I was looking at winds in one of the pods, and I'm like, wow, those winds just look nothing like any wind from any pod anywhere. But remember, people are deploying these at night, so they don't really know what's out there and what they're seeing. And then when I went to Google Earth, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's what the winds are like to the north. Understand now. Thermodynamics are still good. Not so sure I trust the winds from that pod observation. Yeah, no blue ribbon for that one. But again, it's a challenging project, right, because we're operating at night, and again, we're at night, and you can't see those type of things, and we also didn't really plan on being in Minnesota. And again, like I said, also looking at the depth of the boundary layer. These are just sort of some pretty eye candy. But again, this is same type of dual Doppler analysis, really getting at the kinematics, the dynamics, the three-dimensional structure. So I can't really answer you right now, but the answer is still working on analyzing this data. And in this case, this was the forecast for the case that we're looking at, the severe wind probability. So just like when you're looking at a tornado forecast and you see a lot of hatched and pink and 45%, because yes, I look at SPC forecasts. You think, oh my gosh, yes, it's going to happen. Or you think, oh my God, no way it's going to happen. It's very binary, right? So this is the reports for those days. Again, like I said, you have your tornadic storms first. They become big wind-producing MCSs. They may or may not go on to keep producing winds. In this case, we set up our radar hexagon in an awesome place. You can see there's no wind observations at that location, and then it keeps going on and produces severe winds. But very careful review of our data actually did show that severe surface winds did make it down. So some of that just because we were in the right location and we're obviously measuring that. So just because it didn't knock down a tree or something like that doesn't mean they still weren't happening at the surface. So just like TWIRL, and this is your quiz to see if you're really paying attention to what I'm showing on the slides. This is the Dow 6 radar and the crew before the start of the experiment. This is our Dow 6 radar after the experiment. And the difference is, no, we didn't lose crew members, but we did lose something else. So you can get to me with your answer and you might get a blue ribbon if you get it right. But anyway, these projects, again, they take a lot of people out there, a lot of students, a lot of volunteers, a lot of participants really to make these sort of things possible. So that's what we do after it gets dark. And then what we're working on now, Josh is going to talk about, which is also completely different.
So we're doing a project right now. Anybody who's been watching Karen and I, even in the restaurant and everything, we're kind of on conference calls because we have the dowels up at a project called SNOWIE, and basically it's up in Idaho. There, way up there, actually just a little west of that, in western Idaho, up in the Payette River Valley. And Idaho has a big interest in seeding, cloud seeding for snow. It's very important for agriculture in particular. They've been having a spectacular winter up there, just tons and tons of snow. And so we have 2 dowels up on the tops of mountains in pretty challenging sites. And like all these other projects, we're trying to get a variety of different measurements. So we have the 2 dowels up there. There are microwave radiometers looking at snowflakes. There are disdrometers looking at the shapes of the snowflakes. The University of Wyoming King Air is up there flying back and forth. Those are flight tracks. They have a cloud seeding aircraft from the state of Idaho that is going back and forth seeding the clouds. So it's a whole variety of different kinds of instrumentation, again, kind of piling on to try to understand what's happening in these snowstorms, why some of them snow more than others, and in particular, what is the effect of the cloud seeding? Does it really work? And what's it producing? How is it really enhancing the snow? So we put the dowels up on mountains. So this is one of them up on Packer John Mountain. We put them up in October. This is a picture from the dowel. So here's the dowel kind of set up. We have little stumps underneath to try to keep them level through the whole winter months. We set up a little camper, some porta potties. And then we leave it. It gets snowed in. They don't keep these roads open in the winter. We just left them, and then we came back in January, and fortunately they were still there and not shot up. You can see here's what the sites look like. Hey, it's Idaho, I don't know. But anyway, somebody, hopefully not insulting Idahoans in here, but I figure there's probably not many. But it's just, they're getting buried. So there's what they look like in January. We have to snowmobile up and down to them. So it's a pretty challenging site because we send these crews up for days. This site here, they were stranded up in this little camper for 8 days before they kind of went nuts. Anyway, 8 days, they're up there, they're going up this morning and they're heading up there for 5 days. It's going to be pretty unpleasant, and they're just kind of captive in there, but they're operating the radar. So that's good. To get to one of the sites, the FAA every so often plows this road so they can get in, and we just have to follow the snow plow past all this stuff. It's really pretty. It's a different kind of, chasing, so to speak. But yeah, all this stuff is rhymed up. Very pretty trees that you can't see the Dow. It's that one pixel right there. But that's where the Dow is, up on the top of the mountain. There's Karen and Traeger, our technician by some of these snowdrifts. But it's just lots and lots of digging. It's a very different kind of mission, certainly, than you're used to if you're doing tornado work. Everything gets rhymed up pretty horribly. There's our antenna. We're constantly scraping this off. We are not getting good wind measurements off that. But if we can keep them clear, we can try to get measurements. We raise and lower that mast. The problem is, I guess, big chunks of ice were coming off, and the operators were complaining about it being dangerous, so we lowered it again. So it's challenging. Here's home sweet home, little sleeping bags, and there's no water, of course, but we can, with propane, we can get a fire going. And there's a tunnel into the bathroom. So it's, for 8 days, it's kind of miserable. It's not like these explorers of yesteryear, but still pretty miserable. And that's just another picture of our site. They spent a lot of time digging out these sites. That's what they did for 8 days, I think, is, just getting stronger. So this is the kind of thing we see in this radar loop. So on the left is reflectivity, on the right is velocity. But basically, I'll show you at the beginning of the loop, there's not much going on, and then you see these lines show up, and you see one of the lines, when you'll see it again come there, is all these little dots. And what's happened is this aircraft is flying back and forth, leaving every 30 seconds, he turns on this little silver iodide generator, and sure enough, you get these lines happening right where the aircraft is, and they're spaced at exactly the right spacing. I didn't even know how fast the aircraft was going, but he's going at 85 meters per second. Every 30 seconds, he drops the silver iodide, and sure enough, these things are spaced at 2.6 kilometer intervals. I mean, it's a sort of no-brainer. I was kind of a skeptic of whether we were going to see anything in this project, and I was just really shocked to see this really convincing evidence. And we've seen this now in a few different IOPs where they're making the clouds. So that's really exciting. It's kind of the most slam dunk evidence of cloud seeding ever. So the project has been very successful on that. There's still questions, I think, in terms of how many inches of snow did they make, and I keep joking, how many dollars per snowflake did it cost, because they got airplanes up there. I mean, it's not cheap, but that's very exciting, and I think now they have some hope of quantifying that and seeing what's happening. So I'm doing Relampago, right? Yes, okay. So Relampago, which I think means lightning or something of the sort in Spanish, and this is a project down in Argentina. I kind of call it PECAN of the South. It's one of these giant projects, just like PECAN, and it's studying big convective systems. A lot of different organizations. You see the same old players, NOAA, DOE, NOAA, NASA, but also these groups who I don't even know who they are, but they're Argentinian or South American science agencies. And the real motivation, of course, is, hey, come on, Argentina. We don't have to be in central Kansas all spring. There's lots of good wine down there. It's just amazing. They have farm stands out there just selling it you bring your own jug and they fill it up with wine. It's kind of fun. However, we have a serious scientific objective, honest, which is to study these convective systems. The area down there in Argentina, this part of northern Argentina, is a great natural laboratory, actually much better than the high plains in the US. Very reliable convection. These storms just form on most days. And they're huge, some of the biggest, strongest, deepest storms, biggest lightning producers. There's a lot of satellite evidence of this where it just lights up. So we think there are just these amazing storms down there. There's not a lot of surface data, but we do know is that there's day after day after day. Now, of course, the one year we do it might be the drought, but hopefully not. And it's a great natural laboratory for testing this convection. Also, we're testing it in a different environment. So some of the things that we have been learning from these storms out of PECAN, it's possible their local effects are quirky because of something that happens in the US. You can get a much more general theory by studying something some other place. We can see which things are the same, and those at least we know then probably are present in all these kind of storms. Pretty confusing though, everything's going to spin the opposite direction, so supercells, I mean, I don't think I'm going to get used to that, but they're going to be spinning wrong. So we basically were setting up in this Cordoba-Mendoza area, and you can faintly see these lines here. Each one of those is where radars are going to be. And then we're going to bring down the same set of stuff. We're sort of like a broken record. We got these toys, but we're going to have dowels and mesonets and pods. There's a water vapor dial launching weather balloons. S-Pole is going to be down there too. And we're going to be down there in what's spring for them, November, December 2018, if you happen to be down in wine country. And we set up these multiple Doppler lobes. We don't have as many to set up a hexagon like in PECAN, but there'll be aircraft flying around, S-Pole, the dowels, and we're basically, there's a lot of diagrams like this in the science document, but this is after convective initiation, but before the things become an MCS. It's kind of a developing, growing upscale, intensifying storm, sometimes supercell, sometimes not, and we're studying that process and how and when and hopefully why these things produce severe weather when they do. We don't think there are a lot of tornadoes down there, and that's kind of one of the mysteries. We're having all these severe storms. It seems like the environment would be conducive for making tornadoes, maybe more than they do. Of course, maybe tornadoes are happening and they're not seeing them, but we're going to go and we're going to quantify that and also hopefully answer the questions why they're not making tornadoes. So, and then you are talking about this. We're back to tornadoes. Aren't you? Am I talking about this? I'm talking about this. All right, we are doing one more tornado thing. This is just in proposal. So Relampago is happening. That's happening in 2018. Tilt is a project that may be happening. We and a group of others have just proposed it. Do I have a list of all the people? I don't. Us and a group of people, Adam Houston at University of Nebraska, Brian Argro, University of Colorado, Eric Frew, Chris Weiss at Texas Tech, Conrad Ziegler, Eric Rasmussen down in Oklahoma. Who else is in it? What? That's it, and us, and Karen and I. So basically a team similar to the kind of tornado teams you've seen in other vortex-type projects from several different institutions. And we're trying to follow up on some of the things that we did in Vortex with a pretty big project, but not as big as you get with Vortex. So we're trying to have a sort of medium-sized project where we're looking at some of the same questions, but in much more refined ways. And some of these are kind of the next questions after we did some of the studies in Vortex. So we're looking at basically rear flank downdraft surges and internal surges, the roles of the gust fronts and these surges in causing wrap-ups and eventually causing tornadogenesis. Again, some of these kind of questions, I mean, environmental vertical shear, we're trying to evaluate those and more precisely in light of what we've already learned in Vortex 2. So in many ways, it's a follow-up on some of that. There's a focus now, and I think I heard somebody asking Karen some questions there about the forward flank, and there's a new interest or an enhanced interest now in the roles of the forward flank in some of these tornadogenesis, tornado evolution. One big change from Vortex 2 is we're going to really actively be using, again, if this gets funded, please tell your NSF reviewers to approve this. If this gets funded, the UAVs are going to be used a lot. Vortex 2, they were being used experimentally, kind of tentatively really, but one of the things we really, really need are observations aloft. We have all these radars measuring the winds aloft, but not temperature or relative humidity. We have all these mesonets and pods and stick nets, all these kind of things down at the ground. But what's it doing a kilometer, 2 kilometers, 3 kilometers above the ground? We don't know. So by flying them around, there's some pods or stick nets and weather balloons, but you see, and there's some radars or mesonets. But these tracks are basically where the aircraft is going to go and give us a real three-dimensional picture of the thermodynamics, because we've only been getting two-dimensional pictures otherwise. So that's a big, exciting change in terms of what we should be able to do. And I suspect if this is successful, future big tornado projects, when Vortex 6 happens someday, we'll be using UAVs a lot more. And again, these are just the UAVs and where they can operate. There's a lot of restrictions. You probably know that about drones and UAVs and regulations and how you fly them. And also just challenges because they're in severe weather environment. They can't take big downdrafts. I guess they could take big updrafts, but they would go away. So you really need to fly them carefully in certain parts of the storms. And the University of Colorado's been working developing those skills. The radars are kind of doing the same type of thing we did in Vortex 2, if you've ever seen those kind of diagrams, but there's a crude supercell with fronts, gust fronts, forward flanks and rear flanks, moving along, and we just keep these radars moving and hopscotching. So you deploy a bunch of radars ahead of the storm. As the storm starts approaching and that hook starts approaching, this radar's got to bug out, and he moves there and deploys and collects data, and then he moves ahead, and he moves ahead. So different than what you do when you're chasing on the road, where we call you guys hook surfers, where basically you're moving along at 20 miles an hour following the storm. What we do is we get out pretty far ahead, we plant, and then we try to race ahead, probably passing the hook surfers or trying to, and then plant again. So we have these episodic data collections. But with enough radars, we hope to kind of keep that continuous. So these guys are hopscotching it at different times, and we always have at least 2 or 3 radars watching the storm. And then you are going to talk about SNOW again. We have a future SNOW project.
Thank you. All right, this is the last one, I promise. This made sense, I swear, when we were putting together the talks. So this is another project that's working to get funded. It's called Lobsters, and you have to say it with the accent, and it takes a little work. And as you can guess, it's a New England coastal storms nor'easter project. And we're going to be reproposing it yet again for the 2013, or not 2013, sorry, for 2020, I think. So hence the X to the 2018. We have a great acronym, we have a great logo. We have a good experiment, we just need to get funded. But it's a great group of people. We started out really young when we were proposing this. I don't know how old we're actually gonna be when this gets funded, but Penn State, Stony Brook, University of Connecticut, Colorado, and then myself and Josh. Well, it's really small. So what we're really looking at, again, this is a nor'easter project, and we're actually looking at small-scale stuff in nor'easters. So we're looking at mesoscale banding, we're looking at the setting up of the coastal front, which are all really big forecasting challenges for like the Boston office out there, is where it's gonna be this rain-snow transition. Is there a mesolow developing along the coast? Where's the banding going to set up? How intense is the banding going to be? So really looking at sort of these mesoscale and precipitation scale stuff. So not the big coastal low or the big synoptic fronts, but looking at sort of the local effects out there in the Northeast. Our proposed domain as the title probably tells you, is centered along Boston and goes up to Maine and sort of down onto Long Island, depending on where we could actually deploy radars. So as all projects, we're sort of bringing out the same set of toys. So we're proposing to bring out 3 of our DAOs. We're also bringing out Mesonets pods because we're trying to quantify a lot of this mesoscale stuff. But then we also have aircraft that we'd like to bring out. So we're actually trying to get the NCAR C-130 to get out there so we could do drop-ons over the ocean, so we could start looking at stuff that's a little bit offshore and looking at the environment that these storms form in. So basically our set of stuff plus the C-130 is what we're trying to do. So again, like I said, really looking at sort of these mesoscale stuff. Here's an example of a coastal front drawn by me. So it looks sort of weird. But here's a coastal front sort of out by Cape Cod there, setting up a dual or a multi-Doppler array sort of in the bay, and then setting up different distrometers, surface observations, and doing soundings in that area. And then having the aircraft going a little bit more out to sea doing these drop-ons, but then also flying at low levels and sampling the boundary layer structure there. As you can imagine, it's Boston airspace, so we've been going back and forth with how a C-130 flies in Boston airspace. And it is possible to do it, and certainly a lot of these big nor'easter storms, if you ever watch what air traffic does on the East Coast, it shuts down for a while, so it gives the C-130 a nice opportunity to get out there. So prior to this, and sort of what sparked the interest in this, whatever year snowpocalypse was happening, I guess that was 2015 now, there's all these different storms that were going on, and Boston was just shut down forever. But it was really cool. We had a DAO out on the East Coast doing an education project, and then we kind of kept stealing it to do these severe storms and stealing the students to come down and take a look what was going on in these different storms. So Neptune and Juno, I think, were the two we went out for. One of them way on the tip of Cape Cod, and then another one closer in by Plymouth. But like you said, snowpocalypse. So it's pretty nasty out there. Just sort of like we do for hurricanes and for other stuff, we sort of want to be where the action is. So we're not backing off at all. We're really on the coast. We're really in exposed locations. So that's actually Josh there, but you can see the radars getting pretty sandblasted. That was out on, about by the coast, whatever town is up there, Provincetown? Is that what it is? Provincetown. Yeah, Scusset Beach was this one. But again, these are sort of in very exposed locations. And some of the things that we were seeing, you could see a lot on the Boston 80AD, but you could see a lot more when you have a DAO and several DAOs out there about what's going on. And one of these things, we see these in hurricanes a lot, these boundary layer rolls. So in these really sheared boundary layers, what you see are these wind streaks that are going on. In hurricanes, we see these a lot, and we also have shown that they are distributing momentum, they're distributing energy in the boundary layer. So again, this is looking over an ocean, this is fueling a storm. So this is of interest to us to see what these boundary layer rolls and what role they play in nor'easters. So looking at that, these are very sheared storms. Again, these are sort of the upper end events, but hopefully we get enough of these in a season or so. Where you see a lot of turning of winds with height, you also see a lot of increase of winds with height in that case. Looking at an RHI here, it sort of looks like a little layered cake, where you have a lot of winds towards the radar that are pretty strong at low levels, but then when you get aloft, you see a lot of shear and winds away from the radar. And the winds are pretty strong. Again, we're getting in forward locations. This is Scusset Beach. I think this was Juno was the name of the storm. But basically, we had our mesonet, or we had our DAO mast up. I don't even think we had it up all the way either. So it's not even that high up. And we're seeing peak gusts, 77 miles per hour. And some of our sustained winds, 1 minute average, 64 miles per hour. So these are pretty good storms when you get in a nice forward location that you're looking at here. And then just to show an example, and I think this is where I'm closing with, this is looking at one of the storms. This is out in the bay, out by Cape Cod there. Again, you see a lot of these boundary layer rolls of shear. You see a little front type feature moving through there. And then you certainly see the storm picking up in intensity. And again, you see these streaks similar to what you're seeing in hurricane type stuff too. So the example, this Lobsters project really is trying to look at some of these small scale features with these different types of instrumentation, again, to understand sort of the internal workings of these storms and see how these things influence the more larger scale stuff. So I think with that, we're actually done. So do we want to add anything? That was sort of an unclimactic end. We tried to thank people as we went along, so hopefully we didn't leave anybody out. Did you want to add anything? Otherwise, I think we could take questions. or people could just stare at us in stunned silence. Your choice. Yes?
How are you going to get the Dow trucks to Argentina?
On a boat. Yeah, well, you could answer for your trucks.
Yeah, we put them on boats. We've had them over to Europe a couple times, up to Alaska, out to Hawaii, and there are boats called row boats, roll on, roll off. So people have to get cars and trucks and mining equipment and stuff around the world, so it works pretty decently. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah. You're the only one.
How do our projects get funded? So mostly our projects are funded by the National Science Foundation. But at times we've had projects for other agencies, NOAA, Department of Energy, the Army, the Forest Service, NASA. Yeah, I mean, so we've had different agencies, but mostly it's National Science Foundation. So either we write proposals saying, hey, lobsters, that's a great idea, why don't we go out and study New England storms? Or someone else goes and writes a proposal like SNOWIE saying, hey, we really want to see what's going on with seeding and snowstorms in Idaho, and then they ask for us to go out on those projects.
And it takes a while. I mean, so that lobsters project, I was joking, that's going to be our third try. Tilt, that's also going to be I think that's going to be like the fourth try for that. I mean, it takes a lot of iteration to actually get something funded. Yeah, so basically, you're reviewed by your peers, you're reviewed by NSF, and they're looking at your experimental design. Is it a good use of money? What else is going on? And you sort of refine it and hopefully converge on something.
Yeah, some of these big projects can take 5 years or so to get going. You get a bunch of scientists together and they say, hey, here's a great idea. Let's try to focus some coherent scientific strategy of questions we want to learn. Then you go and you write a proposal and you submit it to these government agencies saying, here's exactly what we want to study and why it's important, and here's how we think we can answer these questions. Then it goes through this peer review process, anonymous peer review process, where they write back and say, that stinks. And then you try again. Commonly, you try again. Tilt, for example, Vortex 2, which succeeded, but Vortex 2 failed. It was proposed in 2005. It failed. It was proposed again in 2007 and got deferred. And then it was funded in 2008 and happened in 2009 and 10. And that's not that unusual that these things take a while to get funded. I don't know. They're a lot of money, I think. These big projects are millions of dollars. There's a reasonable, careful process of funding just the best ones. It's very competitive. There's other projects, competing for the same pot of money, and we see a lot of those, and we're asked to participate in a lot of them, and we have projects that are competing for Tilt, and they're all pretty good projects, so it's tough. Somebody? Yeah. Yeah, well, there's an example of one that I don't think is going to go forward. Yeah, you were paying attention and remembering. Yeah, does he get a ribbon? He needs a brain ribbon or something. It's been discussed now for several years to try to do a project in Lake Victoria. Same kind of idea, taking various radars and other kinds of equipment down to study convection or other storms on Lake Victoria, mostly from Uganda and Kenya, Tanzania. But so far, that just has never really come together. And the problem is it's very expensive, very challenging to do a project over in Uganda. It's just... Yeah, that's true. Karen's saying part of the process of developing these proposals and going over there and talking to the local Met services, I went over there and met with the local Met service, and we were kind of figuring out that some of the science questions we were asking weren't the right questions. So there's still an effort to try to get a preliminary project going so we can sort of try to frame what the right questions are going to be before the bigger, multi-million-dollar project happens. Yeah?
Are you guys going back out this year for anything?
Are we going to go out this year for anything? Yes. We haven't made a plan. In fact, Karen and I were just talking this morning, what are we going to do? I don't know. So one of our radars, we have two of those radars up in Idaho. One of them that's on that road that had that snowplow, that we think we can get down in late March because they'll just plow it and we'll zip down right after the plow goes up. The other one, we don't think we're getting it down till mid-June or something. It takes a while for the snow to melt up there. And then there's probably a month of mud. So it's going to be challenging. But we'll have 2 other radars and mesonettes and pods, so we will be trying to do something. Our challenge, we could pass a hat around. You know, if everybody in this room gave us, I don't know, $100? No. Basically, it comes down, it's a lot of funding. So, and much more so, I mean, you go out and chase, you sort of know what it costs, but you got to multiply that by a lot. Our radars, we use a lot of gas. We have 10 to 20 people, and it's, you know, it's hotels and gas and sometimes paying some people salaries. But it's an expensive thing to keep going like that. Equipment is constantly breaking. You know, so our maintenance budget every year is huge because things bust. They never answered the question about what was missing in PECAN. On the first day of PECAN, we ran and we drove down the road with our mast up. It wasn't Karen. It wasn't Karen. It wasn't Karen. Somebody who will remain unnamed drove. Not anymore. No. Now you're going to out this person. Anyway, the mast is 18 meters high. Power lines are less than 18 meters high, and it drove for half a mile. And I think the score was something like Dow mast 4, power lines 1, but eventually that 1 killed the mast. It just snapped right over, and so that was kind of bad. Only $15,000 for a new mast, but that's the kind of thing. I mean, well, that's basically what it is. Yeah, but that's the kind of, and actually worse than that because it broke some of our antenna, which we had to fix. So that's a long answer to yes, we'll do something. We're still sort of scrambling to come up with a plan and figure out how we would fund something. So Tim promises he's going to get stuff into the radius and maximum winds this year. You got to move up in your ribbons. You need that blue ribbon. Must be other questions. Come on, we covered 6 different projects. Yeah.
Dr. Wurman, you talked to the folks on the Office of Public Programs about some of the challenges you have with your instruments getting closed up and all. I know when I lived and worked in Antarctica, there were little tricks they had. They used to keep anemometers from freezing up and representing the lime ice down.
So yeah, we've had light discussions with them. That anemometer is really not formally part of the project. It's on the truck, so we brought it up there. So those wind measurements are kind of secondary to us. What we kind of do is just brush the rime off. Yeah, it comes up pretty easily. Those particular anemometers, the sort of Teflon that the blades are made of is pretty slippery, so the stuff comes off. Our antennas, it's a little more challenging just to keep them, because you want to be really delicate with some of those antenna components. But yeah, we have had sort of informal discussions with them. Some of the same challenges and safety issues mainly. I mean, we have people of various skill levels, mostly low skill levels, snowmobiling up and down to these sites and effectively camping at these sites and just keeping teams safe. Is what discussions I've had with those people is more about, does this seem safe to you? Because they've had a lot of experience with people, so. Well, keeping people alive in those environments. Obviously, all of us were, a little shocked by the person. Somebody died in a snowmobile accident in Antarctica this season, and so we want to make sure that flavor of thing doesn't happen to our team. There's an NSF-funded scientist went into a crevasse with a snowmobile. Yeah. That slide was not what we're doing with PECAN. That slide was a map of sort of, all the places we've been with the Dows. So we had a project along the Pacific coast called CalJet, where we were looking at the boundary jet. Basically, these West Coast systems come in, probably like the one that I haven't been paying attention, but the one that just came into LA. But these systems come into California, they hit the terrain, and there's a pretty enhanced wind zone aloft, a jet that forms along the coast. So that study was back in 1990-something, studying the effects of that jet as these big fronts came in. Yeah?
Do you predict a Vortex 3 anytime soon?
Well, some people joke that tilt is like Vortex 3, but I think at some point, people might propose a Vortex 3. I mean, the real question is, First, have we learned everything we can learn from the previous project, which was expensive to do, expensive to analyze? There are teams in all these different places, different universities, institutions, analyzing that data, and there's still a lot. We're still looking at data. Karen's got an analysis going for a case in Colorado right now. So lots of that is still ongoing. This smaller project, TILT, will collect more data, and in some sense, that would push further out into the future when you would really do a Vortex 3. But if I had to guess, we're not going to learn everything about tornado genesis and evolution from TILT. So at some point in the future, informed by TILT, we'll have more sophisticated questions, next generations of computer models, next generations of observations. These UAVs are a big innovation. So Vortex 1, the big innovation was, we started with one mobile radar in Vortex 1. Vortex 2, the big innovation was really these mobile radars, which were a radical departure from Vortex 1. These UAVs are a pretty big departure. So it's possible that these UAVs or whatever follows along from them 5 years from now would be something, a new kind of technology which would let us answer questions that we really can't with the current technology. Yes, and there is a Vortex Southeast project that's a very different kind of project, which I could say different things about over a beer than I will here. So Vortex SE is a very different kind of study where it's looking at the problem of tornadoes in the southeast. And of course, it's a challenging, you can't do a Vortex 2-like project. You can't really chase storms down there with scientific equipment. It's just not practical. So the idea there is to basically set up stationary arrays and see what goes through. There are a lot of tornadoes in the southeast. Most of them are these QLCS, quasi-linear convective system tornadoes, which tend to be minor. They do get big supercells there sometimes. And I think the main scientific goals are to see what differences there may be in that area, see what can be done to increase the forecastability of the different types of tornadoes in that area.
Well, there's also a movement towards, Vortex SE has a different environment besides that, besides these the QLCS stuff. So Vortex SE, they have low Cape high shear environments, and that's what a lot of those tornadoes that are sort of escaping the Weather Service's forecast are occurring in. So there's a move to get a project going that's a little bit bigger in the upcoming years to look at sort of that type of environment and what type of storms you get in that environment and what type of tornadoes and if there is any predictability for that type of stuff. So going beyond.
Yes. Yeah. No. Yeah. Absolutely. So the different types of environments and things like that. I know we're working on developing different types of analysis code, which will work in different types of terrain down there. So, yeah.
You're still working with TIV?
Are we working with TIV? Loosely. I mean, we haven't. So we have not gotten any common data sets. I mean, so for us. The value of a TIV observation would be if he has an anemometer on there and it's working and connected and collecting data, and we get some radar data over that. And that has not happened in years, since Vortex 2. So I would say, in effect, no, we haven't gotten anything with them in years. I'm certainly, in favor of doing it. They were near the Russell case and left. Yeah, they left 2 minutes before the tornado happened. I'm sure there's ones where we left and didn't go to the right place, but we haven't had a coordinated data set since Vortex 2. Potentially, I mean, those are rare data sets, but they can be quite valuable. We've certainly published analyses about tornado structure based on the Vortex 2 data we got. And yeah, it would have been terrific to have the TIV and sulfur, for example, doing that mesonet run, or not having to run away, staying there, would have been terrific. So. Yes. Here, Karen.
Why, yes. Yeah, actually, it's been a while now. 2013 and 2014, there was a big project called OWLS, which something about lake effect snow in there for that acronym. But yeah, so we had sort of, again, our same suite of instruments. We had the Dows, on Lake Ontario doing multi-Doppler stuff. The University of Wyoming King Air was out there flying over the lake in the boundary layer. And yeah, basically looking at some of the upstream influences. So people are looking at some of that. And as per usual for us, we were looking at these mesovortices that form along these lake effect snow bands, and looking at how that impacted the winds and then also the precipitation structure. So that's an ongoing analysis, actually, which hopefully in the next month I'll publish something. But yeah, so that was a great project, and there's still a lot of stuff coming out from this OWLS project, probably in the next few years.
Yeah, so that project happened about 3 years ago, and I guess I was talking about the 5 years before a project, but there's about the 5 years after a project where these various groups have the data and they're going through these analyses. And in today's kind of projects with all these multiple instruments and everything, these analyses are complex and take a while. It's a slow process. So OWLS, there are a couple papers that are in the mill right now. They've been going through review and coming out. Karen's leading a paper, which is soon, I'll say quote unquote soon, hopefully really soon, to be submitted. But yeah, it takes a while. We're also, you see we're doing a lot of projects, so it's not like, Karen's working full time on that analysis. It's very part-time because of doing these other projects. But same kind of goals, trying to make these events more forecastable, because these bands set up and sometimes they drift, sometimes they stay right where they are. And yeah, just trying to understand why some of them move, why some of them don't, why some of them get very banded and some of them are more blobby. Loosely. The role of these mesovortices in increasing fluxes and mixing through the storms is one of the things we're looking at. So yes, and in many ways, lobsters is kind of very similar to owls, but in a different type of phenomenon. We're deploying along the coast and having similar types of instruments and observation strategies. Nobody over here asks. Oh, there, finally, yeah. Oh, well, there's one closer, then we'll get somebody far away, yeah.
I was just going to ask, not to make too much of a joke out of pass the hat comment, is CSWR set up to take donations at all?
Yes. No.
The winner gets a date with Josh.
We had lots of them lined up before that. Yes, I mean, we can take donations. We can work with anybody who wants to fund something if they want. We're a nonprofit, 501c3, so sure. Unmarked bills, please. And I have where's my metal suitcase? Yeah. No, sorry. Absolutely. I mean, so we've worked with some corporate entities, foundations. We're doing most of our stuff through the government agencies, but we have had small amounts of funding from other sources too, and we're certainly more than willing to work on that and do different things. So.
Yeah, so one thing too is, getting a field project funded is one thing, which is great. I mean, I love collecting data, but the analysis afterwards obviously also takes a lot of time. So getting, so just because you're collecting the data, sometimes it just sits if you don't have some of the money to do the analysis or the time. So it's one part of one part of the science, but there's still.
Yeah, I know we look really busy, but really most of what we do is in the lab, sitting at computers. Most of our team is spending most of their time, looking at this data, analyzing, writing things up for publication. So, but the short answer is yes, sure. We'd be happy to talk to anybody if they wanted to help support some of these efforts. So there was a question farther away. Oh, way back there. Yes. So I don't know much about Argentinian supercells. I mean, they get some supercells. They don't get many tornadoes, we don't think, but not much down there. What they get are these giant MCS things, and those are the ones that are these giant lightning producers. And on satellites, they're just massive. I mean, you just see these giant things blowing up with all this lightning. We know there are lots of flooding events there, and certainly agriculture reports there's a lot of hail. So they're very big storms. So those MCSs are probably bigger and more frequent, or bigger more often, and certainly more frequent than what we see in the U.S.
And they have higher cloud tops too.
Yeah, higher cloud tops. Yeah, bigger, deeper, all those kind of things. In terms of violent supercells like you're getting up here, less. If I had an unlimited amount of funding, wow. I don't know if Dow would be first on my list with an unlimited, you know, that yacht. No, Dow on yacht, Dow on, Dow on private jet. I could think of a lot of things if I had unlimited funding. They're grandiose kind of schemes. I mean, one could imagine if one had lots of money, one could have, you know, a huge targeted, you know, observation system, right? And, you know, we've made sort of, you know, just conceptual diagrams of, you know, what if you had 100 mobile radars, you could send them to the, you know, moderate risk area every day of the year, you know, and have teams doing that. That's, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars a year kind of project. So it would, you know, not something that's going to happen. So you certainly could have a lot more targeted observations. And that's not the only way to do it either. There are proposals to try to build denser arrays of cheaper radars, for example, and that's a proposal to try to have more observations, more places. And then, of course, constantly, but it takes a lot of funding too, is trying to develop, you know, new computational techniques, you know, next generations and, you know, 2 or 3 generations in the future of numerical modeling. But underneath that numerical modeling, at some point, you need better observations to initialize those. So that if I had a lot of money, I would put it into, you know, better numerical modeling and better targeted observations, either by tiling the whole country with more radars or having some kind of mobile targetable fleet. You know, you could imagine targeting weather balloons. You know, if you had 50 mobile balloon launchers, you could set up, or wind profilers or anything like that, you could target them towards these areas every day. Again, these are projects that you're talking, you know, 9-figure kind of funding to do something. So that's, but you asked, what if I had unlimited funding? What would you do with unlimited funding? Retire. Retire. Oh, come on. And she only spent a few nights in that camper up in the snow, you know? Retirement already. Yes, they're looking hungry. The hook has come up here. Yes?
How much does one of these projects typically cost, just to get a rough idea?
$1 million. No. Probably about that. So it kind of depends. I mean, for us to go out and chase just our stuff, and just the chasing part, really, not the analysis effort, is, I don't know, a few $100,000 probably to get us out there. Again, you have to imagine, you know, 15 people out there, and they're out there for a couple months, and we get 4 miles a gallon in the Dow, and, you know, hotels and broken masts. You know, that's sort of how it adds up. A big project, you know, Vortex 2, for example, which had 100 people out there in about 40 or 50 different vehicles for 2 separate years. That used a few million of field costs, so 2 or 3 million of field costs. But then, as Karen was pointing out, the real cost of these projects is beyond that. It's the years of analysis that goes on. So those same teams in Vortex 2 spend 5 years, 8 years analyzing that data, and so that's probably another 10 million. So, you know, most of the money that goes into these projects is the analysis of data, and really it's salaries for the it's salaries to pay people to analyze the data in the 5 to 10 years after a giant project. So, yeah, so I would say these big projects like Vortex are a few $1 million, Relampagos, the field part. I mean, again, if you include the NASA aircraft and the Argentinian stuff, it's probably $5 million to do that. But then the analysis effort might be 10 million on top of that. Now, you know, that's small compared to a, you know, F-35 airplane or something, but it's still, you know, it's big money for our kind of science. Yeah.
Have you ever considered leveraging the hook chasers, supplying them with equipment that is linked to you, or other?
We have. That gets discussed pretty frequently, and basically the question is, how could chasers help with these scientific projects? Yes, it's talked about a lot. It's never really come to fruition. You know, one of the issues is not just supplying the equipment, but making sure that it's always being documented and maintained and operated in a way which is going to get us good enough ops. Some of the questions we're asking need data that's very particular, very calibrated, very documented, beyond what chasers are typically going to do all the time. I was sort of joking earlier when this gentleman asked this question about the TIV. You know, I said, well, yeah, if he's got his instrument there and it's on and it's not tipped over and all that. So, I mean, so there's a guy who we've been trying to work with fairly closely, but his objectives are not to get anemometer measurements. He's trying to film. And so it's hard to make sure his instrument's running all the time. We have this really boring, tedious processes every day with these pods of checking the GPSs and checking the logs, and is this working and that working? I mean, every single day we're going through this really tedium to make our instruments work. And most chasers aren't willing to do that because they've got other objectives. And you know, that's fine to have other objectives, but it just means that we haven't been able to find a way to really connect with that. Now, it's possible with instruments which didn't need much maintenance or automatically kind of working. I mean, for example, everybody's got GPSs now. You don't need to write down your location so precisely. There are occasions where we have used data that has come from chasers to do some analyses, but it's challenging sometimes. And even sometimes people who were, I would say, sometimes doing science and sometimes chasing. I mean, Tim Samaras in his earlier days was not documenting things as well as I would have liked them to do. And we were still using his data, and we have conference papers that were using some data from back in 2003 where he got one of his pressure pods into a multiple vortex. But his times were all off, and it was difficult to do the analysis. Dan Robinson. Dan Robinson, we used his video data from the El Reno case in trying to analyze actually what happened to Tim Samaras and where the vortices were related to where Tim Samaras' vehicle was. Now, he had his GPS on, so it really helped, so the technology helped improve how we could use that data. So I think there are opportunities for that. And yeah, we haven't really, there probably are good opportunities, we just haven't, really taken advantage of them. Yeah, I want to say one more thing though, but actually this relates a little to Jim's talk. I don't know, I didn't watch your talk. So I don't know if you said this or not, but one of the efforts in trying to improve or broaden our ability to get tornado wind speed estimations is using in situ observations. Now we're out there with pods and these calibrated RM Youngs that we're making sure work all the time, but there are a lot of just citizen observations. People have anemometers on their roofs and things like that. And what if that anemometer gets hit by a tornado? How can we use that? Or first of all, can we use that? Is it of good enough quality? How can we use that to help get more information about that tornado wind speed? Even if it's not the most perfect ob, it's maybe better than nothing, right? It can give us a lot. And so one of the groups in this committee is working on standards for when and how you could use those kind of observations. Is that fair to say for that? Yeah, okay. I see the hook. There, hook us away. You're hungry, aren't you?
Thank you, Josh and Karen. That was great. Okay, folks, it is lunchtime, and now we're going to have to take a short lunch because we do want to start at 1 o'clock, right on time, if you would please. There's a grab and go sandwiches over here in the lounge. Help yourself to them, and then at 1 o'clock we're also going to give away a bunch of door prizes. A little more incentive to come back on time, please. All right.